Chapter 386. A raging fire was ignited. As the gunpowder barrels in the warehouse were detonated, the entire port had turned into a sea of fire, and as the fire spread, the sails of some warships were directly ignited. It seemed that the wind was fanning the fire, and more than a dozen warships were on fire. Although the hull was made of wood, it was not so easy to ignite it. Only the sails were the easiest to ignite, and the fire immediately burned them up and then gradually spread to other places. Boom! A series of gunfire sounded, and the dark ghost ship fired continuously at the port. When the enemy realized that a warship had lifted anchor, they gradually escaped into the thick fog. At this time, Soren's figure could no longer be found. Only death, fire, and destruction were left on this island. Prince Hansa's somewhat panicked figure appeared. There were many guards around him and there were a few vague figures. After finding signs of other high-grade rogues' assassination, the number of people responsible for protecting Prince Hans doubled. At this moment, there was no anger on Prince Hansa's face, but a trace of fear, a terrible fear caused by a deep sense of powerlessness. Although there seemed to be only one enemy from beginning to end, he still felt like a prey trapped on this island, and could be swallowed by the enemy at any time. The fog under this night was like a prison, and he could not even determine where the enemy was. It's a high-grade rogue. A vigorous figure with a veil appeared and gently landed beside Prince Hans. He said in a deep voice, "The killing method is simple and neat. It is very likely that he is an assassin close to the legendary level." Soren's assassination method was very similar to that of an assassin. In fact, in the Underdark, even rangers had received combat training as an assassin, let alone an orthodox rogue like Soren. "Can you find him?" Prince Hans turned his head and said with a stiff expression, "Is he still on the island? Can you find him?" The masked man standing beside him shook his head with some difficulty and said in a deep voice, "The other party is proficient in stealth. There are no traces nearby. He may have left the island." "Your Royal Highness, this kind of high-level assassin is very dangerous. It's very difficult for others to discover him. From now on, it's best if you don't leave my sight." Prince Hans turned his head with difficulty, looked at the high-grade warlock next to him and said in a deep voice, "I can be protected by you, but what about the others? What if he sneaks in like this every day to assassinate others?" "Sir, is there any way to find this assassin?" The high-grade warlock pondered for a moment and then said, "If I can find his approximate position in advance, I can use magic to break his stealth. But the entire island is so big that we can't possibly monitor every place. It would be very easy for him to sneak in. Unless there's an expert in tracking who can find him in advance." The fire was gradually extinguished. However, the losses were quite heavy. The leader of the Vrykul pirates yelled angrily because many of his pirates were killed in their sleep. This way of dying was a disgrace to them because they didn't even get to see the enemy's face. "I can arrange some magic traps." The high-grade warlock looked at the fire around him and unconsciously felt a little nervous in his heart, as if someone was watching him. He said, "But don't expect too much. This kind of high-level assassin is also very good at disarming traps. If he wanted to assassinate someone, the first target must be Prince Hans, and the second target was likely to be a spellcaster like him. So he also felt a little scared at the moment. In fact, there were not many high-grade rogues because many rogues were stuck at the level of petty thieves. If they wanted to advance to a high grade, they had to undergo strict training and gradually grow through killing. The casualty rate of rogues in the adventure team had always been high because they had to explore, disarm traps, and investigate the enemy. A little mistake could lead to eternal damnation. The number of high-level assassins like tonight was even rarer, and it would be even more difficult to deal with them. For a first-class assassin, it was not difficult to kill spellcasters below the legendary level. "How are the casualties?" Prince Hans stood in the crowd and asked a naval officer next to him, "How many of our men did we lose?" The naval officer looked a little panicked and lowered his voice. "The casualties are not very high. Many of the dead were Vrykul pirates. Many of our men were on the ship. But our gunpowder warehouse was ignited, and I'm afraid there is not enough ammunition. There was also an explosion in the place where we stored the materials. The loss is probably not small." Prince Hans heard the words and slammed the wall in front of him. He said with a ferocious expression, "Damn it! The result of this night's battle was quite brilliant." Soren stood on the deck of the Dead Man's Voice, watching the flames on the distant island that had not yet been extinguished. He did not expect that the enemy would set up the warehouse where the gunpowder was stored near the port, and the defensive force was not very strong. This was simply great luck. Then there was the scene after he evacuated. he directly ignited the gunpowder barrel and blew up the whole warehouse. This time, the navy of the southern island countries could be said to have suffered a heavy blow. It was estimated that they would not be able to attack Arendelle with only the materials stored on the warship. Because of today's incident, he was afraid that they would increase their defense in the next few days. Soren was going to take it slow and wait for the incident on the west coast to brew. As long as the news of the southern island countries being attacked by pirates came back, Prince Hans would not be able to sit still. After taking one last look at the burning Dragonbone Island, Soren ordered the dead man's voice to return. Today's battle was very rewarding. Because after so many battles, Soren finally got a legendary level special background ability. Death Walker. Death Walker, legendary background ability. You have become accustomed to death and blood after killing again and again. Ending life has become as simple as eating and drinking for you. You are ruthless to the enemy. You have ended thousands of lives in your hands. You have begun to ignore death. In battle, you will awaken the ability of the Death Walker, which will make you have no mercy for the enemy. Even spells such as Friendly Spell will not affect your judgment at all. At the same time, the Aura of Death will further strengthen your intimidation ability, forming a kind of pressure that affects all nearby people. Any enemy who fights with you must go through a force test of will. Otherwise, they will fall into a state of panic because of fear. Permanent will +3, intimidation +50. Note, because you have ended too many lives, you may attract the attention of some beings in the spiritual realm. Death Walker. As Soren's enemies reached more than 1,000, he finally got this legendary slaughter background ability. And because of the additional intimidation ability of the Death Walker, Soren's intimidation had become a basic skill, second only to sneak and knowledge. His intimidation skill had reached 135 points. However, the most important ability of the Death Walker was not the increased will and intimidation, but the intimidation effect caused by the death energy. This was an invisible range ability. It could be understood as a weakened version of Dragon's Aura, making weak enemies lose the courage to fight when facing him. This ability could greatly strengthen Soren's way of coping when facing a siege. If combined with the Gaze of Fear ability added by the Divinity of Fear, ordinary soldiers would not even have the courage to fight against him now. This was similar to the ability of demons. High-grade abyssal demons would inflict fear on the enemy in battle. Many times an army had the ability to kill a high-grade demon, but in the end they were easily defeated because of fear. Dawn was coming. Before Soren got close to Arendelle, he let the ship dive to the bottom of the sea, and then returned to the port alone. He was waiting for news from the south. Chapter 387. Rumble. Bursts of gunfire resounded over the town of this southern island. Pirate ships with black sails could be seen near the port in the distance. Hundreds of cannons fired at the city wall at the same time, and a gap was blasted out in just one round of fire. The fierce vitality suppressed the defenders on the city wall and they could only find ways to hide in the corner. There were cries and shouts everywhere in the town. This sudden attack frightened the civilians who usually lived a comfortable life. Damn it! A man dressed in noble attire shouted, "Return fire! Fight back quickly! Why are there pirates here? Black flag! Aren't they the beheader's men? Why are they attacking us? Aren't they afraid of the kingdom's revenge?" Rumble. What answered him was a second round of gunfire. With the suppression of firepower, speedboats were released from the pirate ship in front. Groups of ferocious-looking pirates began to disembark with weapons in their hands. Some jumped directly into the sea and then rushed towards the town ahead. Bursts of strange cries sounded, and the pirates waved their weapons and rushed towards the town's defenders, launching an almost one-sided massacre. "All of you charge!" A cold light appeared in the one-eyed man's eyes and he shouted in a deep voice, "Don't worry about those ordinary people. Break through the governor's mansion. What can those civilians do? Let's end this quickly. There are troops from the southern island countries stationed nearby. We must retreat before they arrive." Rumble. The one-eyed man killed a guard with a swing of his sword, glanced around and then said, "Follow me. This is the Chamber of Commerce's residence. Charge in." A group of pirates rushed over and fought with the guards of the Chamber of Commerce. The whole town has been plunged into war, but the core of the battle was still where the nobles and merchants lived. The slums were not affected much, because no pirate would be stupid enough to rob there. There was no profit there. At most they could snatch some rotten bread and a few pieces of copper dearls from them. Soon one of the Chamber of Commerce's residences was captured. Among the bloody corpses lying on the ground, two burly pirates carried a box. At this time, another garrison counterattacked, and they immediately picked up their weapons to fight. Whoosh! The box he was carrying fell to the ground, and kindler and silver dirhams immediately spilled out. The shiny gold coins attracted the attention of many people. Then a few guys who looked a little different from the pirates rushed over and grabbed a handful of gold coins, ready to stuff them into their pockets. Clang! A cold light flashed. One-eyed pirate swung his sword and beheaded the pirates who were trying to rob him. He then looked around coldly. His gaze stopped on the leader of another group of pirates and roared, "Have you forgotten the rules set by Sir Soren? Whoever dares to act recklessly will end up like him." There were clearly two groups of pirates attacking. One group was well organized and ferocious, attacking the warehouses and mansions in a planned and arranged manner. The other group was looting wherever they went. Some pirates wanted to retreat after getting something. Needless to say, they were just a small group of pirates that fought alongside him. Broken. The storehouse has been breached. Cheers came from the front, followed by shouts of killing. One-eyed dragon looked around and said to his confidants, "Follow me." Boom. The door of the storehouse was smashed open, and the wealth inside was immediately revealed to the others. There were boxes of kindler and silver dirhams, a variety of other goods as well as food that was collected as taxes. The southern island countries were quite rich. The entire storehouse was filled to the brim, and there were also many swords and weapons. "Take it away. Take it all away. Hurry up and take it away." One-eyed dragon smiled with satisfaction, then shouted, "Has the governor's mansion been breached?" "No." A young pirate replied, "There's a magus there. We've suffered a lot of casualties. Xanadu and his men have retreated. Let those guys go and waste their time with them." "Wizard?" One-eyed dragon heard this and narrowed his eyes, then said, "Then let them have it. Hurry up and take it away. The army should be here in half a day." Boom, boom, boom. The sound of gunfire continued. On the east side of the town, there was a castle built halfway up the mountain. The mansion at the foot of the mountain had been breached, but the nobles who ruled here had retreated to the castle. Without enough firepower, it was very difficult to capture the castle. After the first wave of attack was defeated by the defenders, a group of pirates had retreated. "Damn it." An old noble stood on the castle and roared, "Where are the reinforcements from Nag City? Why haven't they come yet? These damn pirates." What? Boom. A pirate warship turned around and fired at the castle halfway up the mountain, but it was beyond the range of the cannons, so it was basically useless. The battle was still going on. However, some pirates began to retreat in an organized manner, carrying boxes of gold, silver, and goods back. In the end, they didn't even let go of the food in the storehouse. They carried sacks of it back to the warship. The whole town was a mess. Many places were on fire and cries could be heard everywhere. Sporadic battles were still going on in some corners. By the time these pirates retreated, the whole town had almost turned into ruins. The only intact place was the slums, which had no profits. Another place that was almost unaffected was the temple. Few pirates dared to attack the temple, so it had become a shelter for the poor. Many old, weak women and children hid here to seek shelter. The power of the gods made mortals fearful. Even these fierce and cruel pirates did not dare to attack the temple. Boom, boom, boom. There were cheers and howls on the pirate ship. The gunners fired a few more shots at the town in front of them and then left calmly. The same scene happened in many places. The pirate leaders under Soren's command, as well as the scattered pirates summoned by the corresponding pirate kings, looted the cities along the coast of the Southern Island Kingdom. The endless attacks made the army of the Southern Island Kingdom exhausted. Except for a few towns that were not captured, many places were looted like here. And because the kingdom's navy was taken out by Prince Hans, now they couldn't even go out to sea to fight. They could only hide in the town and defend passively. The sea had completely become the world of pirates. Everything seemed to be in a mess. The pirates were rampant. The Southern Island Kingdom had to issue an order to retreat and evacuate all the towns along the coast. As long as they were far away from the coastline, the pirates had to go ashore to attack. Once they went ashore, they would be no match for the regular army. And as long as they were far away from the coast, it would not be so easy for the pirates to retreat. A heavy cavalry of the Southern Island Kingdom could make them suffer. But it seemed that all the pirates had no intention of going ashore to fight. Chapter 388. Arendelle. Soren sat in the corner of the Copperforge Tavern and waited quietly. About half an hour later, the gloomy man he had seen before appeared here. Compared to the last meeting, this time his expression was more respectful, and there was even a trace of panic and fear. It seemed that he didn't dare to look directly into Soren's eyes. "Your Excellency." He bowed slightly and handed a sealed document to Soren and said in a deep voice, "This is what you want." Soren nodded and reached out to take it, then opened it and quickly glanced at it. He slowly said, "Has the attack begun? It seems that Prince Hans will retreat soon. Help me pass on another order. The fleet of the southern island countries has been hit hard. I need them to gather the enemy in the Dark Tide Strait and hit the fleet of the southern island countries." The gloomy man immediately nodded, then glanced at Soren. Seeing that he had no other orders, he quickly left. No matter what, the order from above was to try to be on good terms with the Pirate King. The Thieves' Union was also optimistic about his ability. The next day, Dragonbone Island was in a mess. Half of the port was destroyed and many warships needed to be repaired. Prince Hans stood near the port and watched all this. There was a deep sense of frustration on his face. Just a ghost ship made him so embarrassed, which made him feel weak and powerless. Hurried footsteps sounded. The figure of the high-grade sorcerer appeared behind him. Before he got close, he anxiously said, "Your Highness, something bad has happened. This is the news sent by the kingdom." Hearing the words of the high-grade sorcerer, Prince Hans's heart skipped a beat. The spellcaster had a fifth circle communication skill, so he had always been in close contact with the southern kingdom. He anxiously reached out and took the document. After a brief glance, his face turned pale. He seemed to have suffered a great blow. He murmured, "The beheader, Soren? So it was him who attacked us. Why did he attack us? Why did he help Arendelle?" The high-grade warlock looked at Prince Hans's pale face and reached out to touch him. He said anxiously, "Your Highness, the most important thing right now is not why Soren the beheader attacked us. Instead, it was because the situation in the kingdom was already very bad. Our coastline has been completely lost, and the enemy is running amok in our sea region. Every place along the coastline may be attacked. His Majesty ordered us to retreat immediately. Without the ability to go out to sea, the pirates' warships could directly bombard the cities along the coast. Now the entire southern island nation was in a state of panic, especially when many gods began to fall silent. After the priests did not get any response, they could not even pray for help from the temple. The pirates from the south coast were just like the Viking pirates that invaded Europe. They were like locusts that plundered any place that could be attacked. Retreat. Prince Hans's face was pale as he muttered, "Order the army to retreat." The attack on Arendelle had ended in failure. All the plans had become a dream. The original purpose of blocking the northern sea route to the west coast had also completely failed. Prince Hans could imagine how much blame he would receive when he returned home. The nobles would blame him and the kingdom would blame him. And the brothers that he had worked so hard to defeat might have already begun to plan a comeback. In the end, he might not even be able to keep the throne that he inherited. Go back. Prince Hans's expression gradually recovered, and his eyes were dignified as he said, "I must go back first. As long as I inherit the throne, I can still make a comeback. The army is still in my hands. Everything still has a chance." Speaking of this, his expression was slightly distorted as if he was planning something. He looked at the high-grade warlock behind him and said with a ferocious expression, "I want to see the Sea Witch. I have completed the agreement, and she must help me take the throne according to the agreement." Hearing Prince Hans's words, the high-grade warlock's face changed slightly, and then he lowered his voice and said, "Your Highness. Let's go back and talk about this. Arendelle Royal Palace." Princess Anna looked at the bearded general in front of her with surprise and said in disbelief, "What? You mean the enemy has retreated?" "Yes." The Ice Witch standing next to her nodded and said, "We have been monitoring the nearby waters and can be sure that they are retreating." "Great." Princess Anna stood up happily. Then a trace of worry and sadness appeared on her face and she murmured, "Is it him? Why didn't he come to see me? Does he hate me that much? He came here but he won't even see me?" Hearing Princess Anna's sad words, the others next to her looked at each other. Finally the Ice Witch said, "Your Highness. There is news that the pirates on the south coast have attacked the southern island countries. I am afraid that it is really Sir Soren who secretly helped us. The enemy also retreated in a hurry because of the attack from the rear." Princess Anna nodded blankly and murmured, "Is that so? Then why didn't he come to see me?" There was a burst of hurried footsteps. At this moment, a guard suddenly rushed up and shouted, "Not good. Ghost ship. A ghost ship has appeared in the port." Everyone raised their heads in surprise. Princess Anna rushed out and ran toward the port. Let's go. The captain glanced at the others and quickly followed. Soon they caught up with Her Highness, who was trotting in front. The port of Arendelle was filled with fog. Through the fog, a black warship docked in the distance could be seen. The black hull, the black sails, and the black flagpole made people feel deep pressure at a glance. A huge black shadow wandered around the Spectre ship. None of the nearby ships dared to approach. Everyone was looking at them with awe and fear. Soren. Princess Anna looked at the black warship in the distance. She didn't know why tears fell down. She put her little hand to her mouth and shouted, "Is it you?" There was no response. The dark ghost ship seemed to be empty. It stayed for a moment near the port of Arendelle, and then gradually disappeared into the fog. The dark clouds dispersed. The bright sun shone on this rich and beautiful city in the Frost Kingdom, and everything seemed to have returned to normal. The clouds of war were fading. The mysterious disappearance of Princess Royal did not make this rich country decline, because they knew that there was another person, another figure guarding here. Guarding the mistress of this place. Maybe he didn't show up, but she believed that he would appear again when she needed him. Because this was his promise. Chapter 389. Arendelle regained his calm. However, Soren's war was not over yet, because he had to teach Prince Hans a painful lesson. Otherwise, when he recovered, he would definitely threaten the west coast. Soren absolutely did not want to see another threat. As long as Prince Hans's fleet was destroyed, he would not be able to threaten Soren's rule of the west coast in a short time. This was because the time, energy, and wealth needed to build a fleet was far more than the reconstruction of a legion on land. Only by destroying the navy of the southern island countries could Soren let his pirate leaders control the route to Arendelle. South coast, the outer islands. South coast, the eastern kingdom. South coast, Arendelle. When these three lines were connected, Soren's power would spread across the three seas, and his wealth would increase at an alarming rate. It might even exceed the total tax of a kingdom. At that time, there would be a lot of things that could be done. Soren's financial, material, and manpower were all in place. The power network connected by the three routes was like a C-shaped encirclement, and he could advance to his goal at any time. At that time, the role of the red-haired female pirate, Adele Isabella, could be played. Soren's economic strategy would be completely formed at this moment. Dark Tide Strait. This was a very special route. Because this was the boundary between the Dark Tide fishmen and the human sea, the sea creatures had their own territory. Just like Soren's sea route would never easily enter the territory of the Naga Sirens. There was a vast border in the sea, and the intelligent sea creatures divided their own territory. They would not be stupid enough to bring the vast sea into their sphere of influence, but they would never allow other creatures to easily enter their territory. Therefore, there were some places in the sea that could not be easily entered, especially when a large fleet was sailing. On land, it was like a legion under your command all the way to the territory of other countries. The most likely result of this was a war. The Dark Tide Strait was a demarcation point. The mutated Dark Tide fishmen had built their own kingdom at the bottom of the sea. They had magnificent cities and palaces, just like the other mutated creatures on the sunken continent, living a life that was almost isolated from the world. Marine creatures rarely communicated with humans. In fact, with the protection of the sea goddess, Soren still had a hard time interacting with the Naga Sirens. Marine species were full of aggression. In Soren's memory, marine creatures were ranked at the top of the list of the most difficult places to gain reputation. It was even easier to gain friendliness with the ogres. Just send more meat. The ghost ship approached. On the side of the strait, there were densely packed pirate ships that were ready to set off. A few of them were large warships, but most of them were small fast ships. Due to the narrow terrain of the strait, fast ships could fight more flexibly, and it was convenient for the pirates to land and fight. Almost half of the pirate leaders under Soren's command came, but he did not see the half-elf first mate. The leader was the red-haired female pirate, Adele Isabella. Soren naturally guessed something, but he did not care. The southern island countries still had some military forces, and the coastline there needed to be controlled. Although Soren set off from Arendelle later, he arrived at the Dark Tide Strait first. With the appearance of the ghost ship, the pirates immediately felt excited. This was the power of a leader. Since Soren's rise on the south coast, he had not tasted defeat. Naturally, the pirates under his command were full of confidence in the upcoming battle. Morale was accumulated through victory after victory. Perhaps some people like to use encouraging words to boost morale, but Soren believed that victory gave them courage. Words were actually very weak. Unless it was a desperate situation where there was no way out, the morale of the troops should be built up through battle after battle. Your Excellency Soren. The red-haired female pirate, Cyclops, Scarface, Knight, Giant and other pirate leaders gathered. They knelt down on one knee in front of Soren, bowed and said, "We are all ready for battle." As Soren's territory grew bigger and bigger, his status was naturally different. Although he was still the pirate king, some people thought that he had almost established a pirate kingdom. Pirates should be chaotic. But he established the Order of Pirates, although this order was accumulated with blood and slaughter. But order was order, and order would make rules. The rules belonged to pirates. Especially after Soren single-handedly defeated the navy of the southern island countries, some of his subordinates even proposed to reformulate the legendary Pirate Code. The ruler of the south coast, the beheader, the master of Modo, the protector of the sea goddess, and the protector of Arendelle, Soren, to reformulate the legendary Pirate Code, to establish his supreme position among pirates. The king of the three seas. The pirate leaders under Soren believed that Soren was already qualified to be the pirate king who ruled the south, west and north coasts. And as Soren's right-hand men, their status should also be further improved. Prepare for battle. Soren's figure flew into the air. Flying allowed him to overlook the sea from a high altitude, and then easily found the approaching enemy in the distance. The enemy was entering the strait. Prince Hans probably never dreamed that the pirates of the south coast would ambush him here. For a long time, pirates did not dare to fight with the regular army. Soren should be the only person who led pirates to fight against the kingdom's navy in the past 100 years. This was not a personal grudge between pirate kings. Once the battle started, it was equivalent to declaring war on a kingdom. But Soren now had such confidence and strength because he was the real king of the sea. Boom! The muffled sound of gunfire rang out. When the enemy appeared in sight, the pirate ships immediately began to attack. The fast ships were full of pirates waving their weapons and shouting. These guys immediately threw the hooks in their hands after approaching the enemy's warships. A huge shadow emerged from the bottom of the sea. Not only did the figure of the mutant killer whale appear, but also another huge twisted body appeared. It was a sea snake with 3 heads. After the incarnation of the sea goddess descended, it became Soren's servant. Black flag. It's pirates. Prepare for battle. The black warships in front of them all hung the black flag that represented Soren's subordinates. When they saw that the number of enemies in front of them was no less than their own, the navy of the southern island immediately shook. The nightmare of a few days ago seemed to be still in front of them, and now they were facing a greater challenge. The entire pirate coalition on the south coast. Prince Hans stood on the deck, his whole body cold, and a trace of despair appeared on his face. This was because he saw the ghost ship appear in the distance. The ghost ship that had appeared in his nightmares. Your Royal Highness. The high-grade warlock's expression was also a little panicked. He pulled Prince Hans next to him and whispered, "Get ready to retreat. We can't be the enemy's opponent." Retreat? Prince Hans's expression was a little numb. He murmured, "How to retreat? Retreat to Arendelle?" The high-grade warlock's gaze was somewhat evasive. As a high and mighty spellcaster, he didn't want to lose his life here. He said in a voice that only Prince Hans could hear, "I have set up a teleportation array on the ship, which can directly teleport us to my tower." Teleportation array? Prince Hans's expression showed a trace of vitality, and he said with an ugly face, "What about them? We can retreat. What about these troops?" The high-grade warlock's face was resolute. He lowered his voice and said, "Your Royal Highness, we can't care so much now. Wait for the enemy to rush over. It won't be so easy for us to retreat again." The pirate army was unstoppable. The pirate leaders under Soren's command were all high-grade professions who grew up in battle. They were all high-grade professions that grew up in battle. Perhaps none of them had advanced into the legendary realm, but many of them used to be the leaders of pirates and had rich combat experience. Not to mention there were still 2 sea monsters and Sauron's ghost ship. The pirate minions were all in high morale and roaring. The battle on Raging Sand Island had just ended. They were basically not afraid of the scene in front of them. Some of the pirate minions even thought that the terrible light would appear again. Super Arcane Crystal Pulse Cannon. Prince Hans stood stiffly in the same place. In the end, he gritted his teeth, handed over the command to the admiral next to him, and then followed the high-grade warlock into the cabin. The flank had been disrupted by the sea monsters. If they didn't leave now, they might not have a chance. On the other side, Soren was also looking for Prince Hans's warship. It was naturally the best thing to solve the enemy once and for all. However, the enemy would not be so stupid to let the warship appear at the front. It was completely giving the enemy a chance to focus fire on it. In a naval battle of this scale, even the dragon-headed warship with the strongest defensive ability was in the center. Only the ghost ship, a special warship that could dive into the sea, could allow Soren to swagger among the enemy. The battle in the Dark Tide Strait continued. However, the result of the battle was predictable. No one noticed that on the other side of the strait, some sea creatures with dark scales were also watching them. Don't worry about them. A strange creature covered with dark green scales was watching the front. It had a mouth that was close to half the size of its head and a strange green metal weapon in its hand that looked like a sea fork. Near it were many sea creatures of similar size. Their bodies were all covered in dark scales, and they stayed in the sea like an army. The Dark Tide Fishman, who looked like the leader, sneered and said slowly, "It's just an internal war among humans. As long as they don't enter our territory, don't worry about them. If they dare to enter our waters, immediately sink all their warships." These sea creatures dived back into the sea. However, some dark green figures could still be seen in the area outside the strait. P.S. There is only one update today. This naval battle is over. Next is the plot of the God Line. Chapter 390. 3 days had passed since the battle in the Dark Tide Strait. After defeating the navy of the southern island country, Soren naturally took over the route from the west coast to Arendelle. However, it was a pity that some of the enemies still managed to escape, especially Prince Hans of the Southern Island Kingdom. Soren did not see him at all since the beginning of the battle. He probably escaped with the help of magic when he saw that something was wrong. This made Soren feel sorry for a while, but he was also a little helpless because Prince Hans must have high-grade spellcasters around him. After the spellcasters entered the higher grade, the difficulty of killing them increased sharply. In these 3 days, Soren redivided the pirate leaders under his command. The half-elf first mate was still in charge of the eastern route, but the overseas route was handed over to the steady knight and butler. These two pirate leaders were descendants of nobles. The battles between the nobles and the mainland were also very fierce. They belonged to the losers of the noble family, which was almost equivalent to being exiled. If such a noble family fell, it was very likely that they would lead the knights in the family to become pirates. The two of them were the newly risen pirate leaders. Compared to others, these two pirate leaders received more education. The political skills of the nobles were more conducive to dealing with Port Tylon and shipwrecks overseas. The west coast route was in charge of the one-eyed man. His ruthlessness could shock others. As for the red-haired female pirate Adele Elizabeth, who was most eager to be recognized and wanted to be on an equal footing with the half-elf first mate, she was a little disappointed recently. Although Soren let her take charge of the north coast route, he also sent 2 other pirate leaders over. They were the brave giant, part of the giant bloodline, and the cruel and bloodthirsty Scarface. Although Soren defeated the navy of the southern island country on the north coast, it was the territory of the Vrykul pirates after all. This group of Vrykul pirates living in Iceland was very fierce. Naturally, Soren's men were also the kind who were good at fighting and killing. Dang dang dang. There was a knock on the door. Soren sat in the room, looked up and said, "Come in, Your Excellency." The red-haired female pirate came in and bowed her head. "What can I do for you?" Soren looked her up and down. Although she had been drifting on the sea all year round, the red-haired female pirate's skin was still fair. She was tall, slender, and well-proportioned. No matter from which angle, she was a first-class beauty. More importantly, because of the education she had received since she was a child, she had the aura of a noble woman. This was very important to Soren because the red-haired female pirate was a very important chess piece in his next plan. "There's a shirt over there." Soren took a few glances and pointed to the side. "Change your clothes and let me see." A faint blush appeared on the red-haired pirate's face when she heard this, but she still obediently prepared to change her clothes. He had prepared a lace-patterned noble lady's dress for her. The delicate sleeves were very beautiful, and there was also a pair of white silk gloves at the side. The red-haired female pirate rarely wore such clothes, so after hesitating for a moment, she clumsily changed into them in front of Soren. No matter what he wanted, she had no right to refuse. Moreover, she might not be willing to refuse. But unfortunately, Soren had no other ideas. When the red-haired female pirate changed her clothes, he lowered his head again and picked up the quill pen to write a letter. When the red-haired female pirate in front of him changed her clothes and came over, he looked up and glanced at her with a smile on his face. He nodded and said, Not bad. Very beautiful. After changing her clothes, Adele Isabella looked like a beautiful noble lady. Her originally fierce aura was softened by the way she was dressed. In addition to the aristocratic education she had received, she looked like a noble lady from every angle. There's a task for you to do. Soren took a few glances and his expression became serious. He looked at the red-haired female pirate in front of him and said in a deep voice, "There will naturally be other people to deal with the Vrykul pirates on the north coast. Although you are responsible for managing the route to Arendelle, I have more important things to teach you. This is a letter to Princess Anna of Arendelle. Take this letter to her. She will allow you to stay in the palace as her female companion. At the same time, she will bestow you with a noble title. When you get there, your first task is to learn the court etiquette and fully master the aristocratic set. Then I need you to find a way to contact the nobles on the south coast as a descendant of Elizabeth. It's best if it's your mother's nobility. Your new identity will be recognized by Princess Anna, the successor of Arendelle. In this way, it's basically impossible for others to doubt you. Your task is to make friends with them and find a way to gain the support and trust of these nobles." A foreign monk was good at chanting scriptures. Soren's original plan was to support the red-haired female pirate Adele Isabella himself, and then find a way to open up a situation with the nobles on the south coast. But now that he had the backing of Arendelle, he had a simpler way to get Adele Isabella a new identity. A descendant of Isabella who had been stranded overseas. With the recognition and support of Princess Anna, the successor of Arendelle, her new identity was basically set in stone. This was enough for Adele Isabella to easily dispel the doubts of other nobles. Because nobles were such a group of people, anything related to the royal family was easily pursued by them. In Soren's plan, the red-haired female pirate would become a good friend of Princess Anna and accompany her as a female companion in the palace several times. As long as the identity of a noble descendant was recognized, then what Soren had to do next would be much easier. Clap clap. Soren gently clapped his hands, and then 2 or 3 beautiful maids and a middle-aged man who was obviously dressed as a noble butler appeared. He glanced at Adele Isabella and slowly said, "They will be the servants of your new identity. Tomorrow you will take a merchant ship from Shipwreck Bay to Arendelle. When you get there, there will naturally be someone to meet you and arrange your next things. Your task is to go around Arendelle and return to the south coast with a new identity. I will transfer an additional 100,000 Kindler's funds for you to arrange. The specific task is here. I will explain it to you in other ways later." Soren reached out and handed over 2 letters. The red-haired female pirate reached out and nodded with a serious expression. "I will never let you down again." Even if she was an idiot. At this moment she could also feel that Soren's plan was not small. It seemed that His Excellency the Beheader was preparing to extend his hand to the land of the south coast. What he was plotting was probably not simple. No matter how vast the sea was, it was still rootless duckweed after all. Although the foundation was established in the outer islands and the city of Mordor was gradually growing, it was still too far away from human civilization. Many things needed to rely on the mainland for supplies, and the kingdom on the south coast was a place that Soren needed to enter. Otherwise he would be too dependent on Port Tylon. A pirate naturally could not blatantly extend his hand to the land. It would be too eye-catching. Soren's plan was very complicated. The identity of the red-haired female pirate was just the beginning. To achieve his goal, he needed to make more preparations. A day passed quickly. Adele Isabella embarked on a journey to Arendelle. The middle-aged butler with a rigid expression tirelessly told her about the things that nobles should pay attention to, and she listened very carefully. This was a task that tested her acting ability, and women were naturally good at acting, so she was very confident about this task. The journey was calm. As Adele Isabella arrived at Arendelle, all the people responsible for her were in place. Ms. Isabella. A low-key but luxurious carriage stopped at the port, and then carried her into the noble district of Arendelle without attracting attention. The carriage finally stopped in front of a magnificent aristocratic mansion. There was already a row of servants waiting in front of the door. They were welcoming their new master, although no one had seen her yet. This was just one of the properties under her name. Adele Isabella was now a noble, rich, young, and beautiful noble lady. She not only bought one of the best mansions in the noble district in recent days, but also directly bought 3 shops in the central area near the port of Arendelle. It was said that she ran her own chamber of commerce on the south coast and was ready to expand her business to Arendelle in the south. Many people paid attention to this rich and beautiful noble lady. However, she seemed to be very low-key and refused all the visits from other nobles in Arendelle. Occasionally, there would be people who wanted to test the background of this young, beautiful, and wealthy noble lady. However, they were all dealt a heavy blow. Only then did they realize that this lady's identity wasn't that simple. She was not a soft persimmon that could be easily manipulated. A woman who could expand her business all the way from the south to the north was naturally not simple. But the nobles in Arendelle realized that she was not simple for the first time at a banquet in the palace. It was a banquet hosted by Princess Anna. And this mysterious, rich and beautiful noble lady, who was said to be a direct descendant of Queen Isabella, accompanied Princess Anna directly and sat on the left side of Her Majesty after the banquet began. P.S. There is one more update today. Chapter 391. Soren did not waste too much time. After he sent the blueprint for a new round of construction to the outer islands, he continued to prepare to complete the chain quest of the 4 elemental stones. Now he was getting closer and closer to the realm of legends. It was estimated that after completing these quests, he would be able to advance to the realm of legends. At that time, he might be able to try to fuse the shards of divinity obtained from the quests. A sealed shard of divinity, which was said to come from a fallen evil god, was still a little dangerous. It required a very high will to fight against the remaining power of the divinity. Therefore, Soren was also hesitant about whether he should give the shard of divinity to Vivian to absorb. The will of the gods was a very troublesome thing. After all, Vivian was still too young. Her will was definitely not comparable to Soren, who had experienced so much. As time passed, it slowly spread. The matter of defeating the navy of the southern island countries was also brewing. Soren finally got a new legendary point, and he got 2 at once. Fog Sea Battle, Legendary Battle. In early March 1676 of the New Moon era, you single-handedly sniped the coalition forces of the southern island countries and the Vrykul pirates in the waters near Arendelle. In this battle, you severely damaged the enemy and repelled the navy of the southern island countries. The legend of the ghost ship gradually spread to the Frost Kingdom. The result of this battle is still brewing. There are faint rumors among the people that you are the guardian of Arendelle. Legendary point +2, Dark Tide Sea Battle, Large Battle. In mid-March 1676 of the New Moon era, you led the pirate army near the Dark Tide Strait to attack the retreating army of the southern island countries. In this battle, you severely damaged the navy of the southern island countries and brought the west coast into your sphere of influence. With the victory of this battle, your reputation among the pirates has become higher and higher. Some people have even proposed to formulate the pirate code in your name that represents the pirate king. Legendary point +3. The 2 legendary points were calculated separately. Perhaps because of the difference between these 2 battles, Soren got 5 legendary points this time. With the increase of legendary points, personal reputation would also increase, and more people would know about you. Normally, adventurers would only have around 10 legend points at most, which meant that they were quite famous in a certain area. Once a player's legendary points reached around 20 points, their reputation would spread far and wide. It was possible that many people in a kingdom would have heard of their legend. For example, when Soren had just become the Pirate King. When a person's legend points exceeded 30 points, the range of their fame would quickly expand. It could be said that their fame had already spread to half the continent. 50 legendary points was a watershed. If one wanted to advance further, one would either have to do something that would make one a household name, or find a way to spread one's name outside of the continent. Take Soren for example. Although he was quite famous among the pirates and had heard of him in various kingdoms, he was still a pirate. However, no one in the Underdark knew who he was. As for the other planes like the Bottomless Abyss, Bator Inferno, Elysium Wilderness, and the Grey Realm, they had no idea who Soren was. Frost Kingdom. Soren once again came to the Frost Kingdom, but this time he was not going to Arendelle. Instead, he was heading towards the Frost Mountains. This was the territory of the Ice Trolls. Although Soren already had the ability to challenge these creatures with amazing regenerative abilities, he did not have the idea of using them to level up his profession. Because these monsters were not easy to kill. Their regenerative abilities were too abnormal. More importantly, the trolls here had spell-like abilities. Perhaps because they lived in too cold an area, these ice trolls had mutated into spell-like creatures. They were creatures that could cause people to fail miserably. Moreover, there was a certain chance of encountering a troll witch doctor, a kind of spellcaster similar to a shaman. Rogues were naturally at a disadvantage against them. Monsters like trolls could grow their heads after being chopped off. Stabbing their hearts would be fine, which was not in line with Soren's fighting style. Moving along the cold frost mountains, Soren gradually entered a valley in the mountains. There was steep ice on all sides. As the number of creatures entering here began to decrease sharply, some elementals that were difficult to deal with appeared. Ice Elemental. Ice Elemental, Elemental, Grade 4. Challenge Rating. Level 10 Monster Level, 15, possesses spell-like abilities. Highest and lowest attributes, 22 and 10, total attribute points, 90 to 100. Special abilities, Elemental Armor, Ice Lance, Elemental Characteristics, Cold Characteristics. Challenge Difficulty, A. Elementals were all supernatural creatures. Basically, they were around Grade 4. They were difficult enemies for ordinary people to deal with. Even the pirate leaders under Soren's command found it difficult to deal with them. Ice elementals were ice bodies up to 2 meters tall. Like earth elementals, they only had a vague human shape. Their bodies were close to light blue, and they were completely composed of very hard ice. There were basically no fatal points on their bodies. Any injuries could be gradually healed. They only needed to refreeze the water into ice. Therefore, dealing with them must be done in one go. As they entered the territory of the ice elementals, the legendary curved sword, Icing Death, began to emit a cold light. When the nearby temperature was close to 0, Icing Death would automatically emit a strange light and then extinguish the nearby flames. It could reduce the cold damage that Soren received. This level of battle was not difficult for Soren. He easily defeated these ice elementals, and then gradually went deeper into the altar. The real highlight was the giant elemental that appeared after taking away the elemental stone. The last time it appeared was a legendary earth giant. This time he did not know what would appear. After all, Soren did not fully understand it. The altar was very similar to the one he saw last time. Soren approached carefully, then groped around the altar and soon found the elemental stone, water. Rumble. When he took out this elemental stone, the ice under his feet immediately began to shatter, and then a huge arm suddenly stretched out from under the altar. The ground cracked in all directions like a spider web. It was only the size of an arm, but it had already reached the height of Soren. Rumble. A huge body appeared. A creature with an upper body made of ice and a lower body made of spiral-shaped water like a whirlpool appeared. Ice Jin. Demigod, damn it. Soren's face changed slightly. In a flash, he escaped into the shadows and then fled out of the valley. The elemental Jin were all demigod creatures, much more powerful than the elemental elders. Some could even directly fulfill the wishes of mortals, just like the legendary magic lamp. Such an enemy was not easy to deal with. However, just as Soren fled out of the valley, the ice Jin rushed out of the ground and suddenly said, "I'm finally free." Mortal. Did you release Chronicles? Chapter 392. Demigod Jin. Elemental form of special life. Basically, as long as the 4 major elements were related to the title of Jin, they were all creatures with divinity. However, the most active of the 4 elements were the fire and wind elements. In most cases, adventurers still encountered the Jin the most. They were also the most interesting Jin because the Jin liked to ask questions to others, or give a question to test others. As long as one could answer the Jin's question correctly, then it was possible to get its help or even reward. This was the same whether it was good or evil because the Jin were basically neutral creatures. There were some special legendary items in this world. Could be a magic bottle or a magic lamp. There were sealed or trapped demigod Jin in it. If one could find them, they could control the Jin and make it serve them, but there were also corresponding rules. Because the elemental life had its own contract, the Jin rarely intervened in the affairs of mortals. It seemed that there was no need to fight. Soren stopped and turned to look at the ice Jin in the distance, but he did not approach because Soren was very careful. Yes. He nodded slightly and said, "Your Excellency Chronicles, I released you." Demigod Jin were very powerful. Unfortunately, they also had a fatal weakness, that was, they could be imprisoned by some special means. Therefore, many legendary spellcasters had tried to imprison the Jin. The ice Jin in front of him seemed to be one of them. Soren carefully observed his opponent. Among the enemies of the demigod level, the most difficult to deal with was the demigod lich. Although the challenge of the Jin was much lower than that of the demigod lich, it was also a legendary creature with a monster level of 24 or above. You can only become a demigod when you become a legend. Very good. Chronicles turned his huge body, frowned and looked here and said in a deep voice, "I don't like the material plane. Mortals. I will soon return to the elemental world, so are you ready to accept my test?" Test? Soren was startled when he heard the words and then said, "What test?" Chronicles looked at Soren in front of him and said in a low voice, "Even if you release me, I can't let you take away the elemental stones at will, and I can't give you a reward in violation of the contract. Any seal will be broken one day. The person who removes the seal must pass the test to take it away. Of course you can also try to escape. However, according to the contract you will have to defeat me." Speaking of this, the ice genie raised its hand and pointed to the front. The ice and snow in the distance cracked and then turned into a big avalanche in an instant, blocking the way out of the valley. Soren's eyes turned cold when he saw this scene. If he had tried to run away he would have been buried by the snow. Although it wouldn't threaten his life, his escape plan would have failed. "All right." Demigod Titanic Chronicles frowned as he looked at the sun and said, "Mortal, I don't have much time to waste, so prepare to accept my test now. I will ask you some questions. Please choose your answer carefully because it will determine what you will face next." It stared at Soren and said in a low voice, "Then, mortals, if you are trapped in a dungeon now, there is a button in front of you. If you press it, you will be saved and an innocent person will die. What will you choose?" Soren frowned when he heard this. He glanced at the ice genie in front of him and said, "I will press it." "Very good." Chronicles nodded, not knowing if he was satisfied or dissatisfied. He then asked, "Because you pressed the button, an innocent person died. However, although you escaped from the dungeon, you encountered a powerful demon. You can't defeat this demon at all, but you found your former companions in other dungeons. If you gather everyone's strength, you may defeat this powerful demon, but it is more likely that all of you will die here. However, you can also bewitch others to help you delay this demon, and then as a rogue you can easily escape. What will you choose?" Soren frowned even more when he heard this. He didn't know when he put his hand on the hilt of icing death, and then said in a deep voice, "I will choose to fight." The ice genie's smile suddenly became a little playful. It raised its hand and waved gently, and a dice with 20 faces appeared. The numbers on it ranged from 1 to 20. Chronicles looked at Soren and said in a deep voice, "Do you know the war chess game during the Arcane Empire? If you want to defeat an invincible enemy you must have absolute luck." The dice made of ice spun rapidly. Then it fell to the ground with a click. The numbers on it rolled and the final number was 20. "It seems that the goddess of luck is on your side." Chronicles' expression was a little indifferent, and he continued to say in a low voice, "Congratulations. You have killed this powerful demon. You and your companions have been saved, and as a reward for defeating the demon, you have gained a lot of wealth." The ice genie raised its hand and waved gently. A dimensional pocket appeared in front of it, and then pieces of blue gems fell from it. There were exactly 20 pieces and all of them were placed in front of Soren. The demigod genie glanced at the surprised Soren, and said with a playful expression, "Mortal, this is an ice crystal from the elemental plane, a very rare and expensive gem. It is also the reward you deserve." However, at this point Chronicles paused and continued in a low voice, "It's not over yet. As you defeated this powerful demon, you found that this dungeon was a very complicated maze. You saw something next to the demon's body. It came from the most important person in your heart. The person you care about most seems to be trapped in the dungeon." Soren's face changed slightly, but the expression of the demigod genie was still very playful. It said in a low voice, "You are ready to enter the dungeon again to find the person you care about most. But there was a disagreement in your team. Some of your companions, after experiencing the battle that could be said to be a fluke victory, thought that they should leave here first instead of putting everyone in danger for one person. Half of them supported you and were willing to follow you back to the dungeon. And the other half opposed you and were ready to leave here and find a safe way out. But at this time a demon's shadow appeared. It accused you with insightful words and told others that your original plan was to let them out to delay the demon, and then you were ready to run away. Your companions believed it. Because the demon's words were so bewitching, you finally became alone, and your companions decided to leave here. At this time, what will you choose? Will you go with them to find an exit out of this dungeon maze? Or will you return to the dark and dangerous cave to find the person you care most about who may be trapped here?" Soren looked up at the demigod genie and said without hesitation, "I will choose to go back to find the person I care most about." As soon as his voice fell, the demigod genie nodded, then raised his hand and waved, and some monster shadows appeared out of thin air in front of him. "Very good." Chronicles continued in a low voice, "You choose to return to the depths of the dungeon, and your companions go to find an exit out of here. It's quite dangerous here. Because you just met a demon that you can hardly defeat. Soon you will meet a new enemy. A strong Tauren warrior. The light of magic emerged. The demigod genie seemed to cast some kind of summoning spell, and the shadow of the abyss appeared in front of it. Then, a strong Tauren with a height of 3 meters and full body armor appeared. It held a battle axe that weighed more than 300 pounds in its hand. After it appeared, it roared at Soren and swung the huge battle axe at him. Unfortunately, Chronicles' expression seemed to be quite interested, and he continued in a low voice as if he was explaining, "You met a Tauren from the bottomless abyss. It may not be as strong as the demon at the beginning, but it is still quite difficult to deal with." Rumble. The ice on the ground was split by the battle axe, and Soren leaped to avoid the enemy's attack. At the same time he pulled out his curved sword with a clang. This test seemed to be a bit interesting. In his past memory, it seemed that only a very small number of demigod jinns could do this and turn a simple problem into the current situation. And one of them seemed to have the name Nagus behind it. Clang. Soren swung his sword to block the attack of the Tauren from the abyss. His whole body could not help but take 3 steps back under the huge force. Then he turned around and swung his sword, leaving a mark on the Tauren's solid armor. A creature level of more than 15. This was a demonized Tauren that was teleported by mid-grade and high-grade summoning spells. There were many such Taurens in the abyss because one of the powerful demon lords was a Tauren. Roar. A dull roar sounded. The Tauren from the abyss stepped on the ground, and a wave of air raged around like a shock wave. Then it locked onto Soren's position with its scarlet pupils and swung the heavy battle axe again. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. A cold light appeared in Soren's eyes, and his figure suddenly swooped up. In an instant, he passed like a shadow, and then his curved sword icing death slashed across the throat of the Tauren from the abyss. Plop. A headless body fell to the ground, and Soren stood on the ground and put his sword back into its sheath. Chapter 393. Blood gushed out from the wound. Soren stood there expressionlessly, but he didn't relax at all. The demigod ice genie didn't seem to be too surprised by this result. Instead, it continued to say in a low voice, "The enemy in front of you doesn't pose a threat to you, but as you entered the depths of the dungeon, there was a strange noise from the ground, followed by a wave of sharp arrows flying towards you. It seems that you have triggered some kind of mechanism." As soon as it finished speaking, it raised its hand and waved. The ice on all sides suddenly turned into ice arrows and attacked Soren directly. Clang, clang, clang. Another curved sword appeared in Soren's palm. The 2 swords in his hands turned into a stream of light that blocked the ice arrows coming from all directions. At the same time, he rolled back 3 meters, held the 2 swords in front of his chest, and vigilantly watched the demigod ice genie in front of him. The spell attack that the opponent had just launched was completely without warning. The enemy at the level of a demigod was really different from all the enemies he had encountered in the past. The realm of the gods had its own rules. The ice arrows just now were completely improvised spells. You dodged the trap with some skill. Chronicles looked up at the sky and his expression seemed to change slightly. Then it continued to say in a low voice, "You found the person you were looking for in a dungeon room." But at this time, there was a loud rumbling sound in the dungeon. When you opened the door, you seem to have triggered some kind of mechanism. Now the whole dungeon is about to collapse. Hot magma is gushing out from the ground, and the scorching atmosphere is enveloping the dungeon. This place may be engulfed by the gushing magma at any time. The ground around them shook. The frozen ice gradually shattered, and the whole valley seemed to tremble as if something terrible was about to happen. A divine light appeared in the eyes of the demigod ice genie. It stared at Soren in front of it, and its smile suddenly became strange. It said in a low voice, "At this time, the devil that first appeared suddenly appeared and stood in front of you." The figure of Chronicles seemed to be distorted. As if it was not a body made of matter, it smiled strangely and said, "I can open a portal to let you leave here. However, this portal will only allow one person to leave. The other person will be buried. Who will you choose to let leave?" Rumble. The mountains on all sides of the valley began to collapse. Ice and snow rushed down like a flood, and the rock structure of the mountain gradually cracked. It was like an earthquake spell, and the cliffs around the valley began to fall down. It wouldn't take long for the entire valley to be buried by the falling rocks. The light of a teleportation gate appeared. A blue portal appeared in front of Soren, and the demigod ice genie was staring at him with a strange smile. It was as if he was waiting for Soren's answer. Soren furrowed his brows as he lightly dodged a boulder that fell from the sky. The boulder created a crater in the ground, and with such force, even he would be severely injured. He wanted to leave here, but he felt that the demigod ice genie had locked onto his body. It was waiting for his answer, and its smile was as ferocious as the devil's. "I'll stay." Soren slowly pulled out his curved sword and his muscles tightened. He was ready to fight at any time and said in a deep voice, "I will choose to let myself stay." Rumble. The ground gradually cracked and the nearby mountains collapsed. A boulder with a diameter of more than 10 meters fell from the sky. The demigod ice genie stared at Soren and then smiled playfully. "Very good. You have passed my test, mortal. Goodbye. I hope we can meet again one day." The figure of Chronicles gradually disappeared. However, the drastic changes around did not stop. Boulders fell one after another, and the collapsed mountains were about to bury this place. Soren took a deep breath. Then he quickly cast a spell. With the help of the fly spell, he rose into the air. When his figure flew in the air, the valley in front of him had been buried by ice, snow, and rocks. The whole valley had become a ruin, and almost half of the nearby mountains had collapsed. If he didn't have the fly spell, he wouldn't have been able to escape at all. In the end, he would inevitably be buried under the rocks and ice. The original elemental altar had completely disappeared. The elemental energy here seemed to have changed. The breath of the ice element had completely disappeared here. The figure of the demigod ice genie was nowhere to be seen. He didn't know if it had returned to the elemental plane or went to other worlds. Soren's figure stayed in the air for a moment, and then flew to the east. The mountain collapsed and buried everything behind him. It was estimated that the ice element would never appear here again. Intuition told him that there might be a magic circle under this valley, but it should have been completely destroyed now. He didn't care where the demigod ice genie would go after the seal was lifted, because with the arrival of the Avatar crisis, creatures of this level would become more and more common. But he didn't know why. He always felt that the demigod wind genie was a bit strange. It seemed to be different from the elemental spirits in his memory. Maybe this was the reason why it was sealed. Soren didn't stay here. He went directly in the direction of the eastern desert. There wasn't much time left for him because according to the progress in his memory, if there were no particularly big changes, there would soon be important news coming out of the Underdark. When he heard the news, he was near the misty forest. The time should be around April. The gods had appeared. Among the first batch of gods that fell to the mortal world, one of them appeared in the Underdark and eventually died there. Note: for details, please review the chapter near Whiterun. It mentioned the gods who fell to the mortal world at that time. 3 days passed quickly. Soren crossed the snow plains and left the cold country from Icewind Valley again. He didn't go to the elves' territory because recently he heard that the elf kingdom was not very stable. The Droll Church seemed to have a fierce conflict with the elf god system, so many legendary Droll were dissatisfied with the elf royal family. The Droll organization's recent actions were quite abnormal. People who paid attention could basically feel that they were planning something, but because it was difficult to sneak into the Droll's territory, there was no specific news yet. Note: for details, please review the chapter near the elemental stone, Earth. Soren would naturally pay attention to this news. Night fell. Soren came to a place called Blackwater Town near the misty forest. There were rich coal resources here, and it was an open-pit coal mine, so it was much more prosperous than other towns. He had been here before, but at that time, it was already in ruins. Due to excessive mining and cutting of trees, the humans near Blackwater Town had offended a group of powerful natural beings. But now Blackwater Town was still very prosperous, with many caravans and a population of more than 10,000 households. There were some supernatural beings in the misty forest. Some of them were existences that even Soren didn't dare to provoke, so he was just passing by. The hotel was very lively. But this was the hinterland of the continent, so there was basically no news from the south coast, and no major events happened in the Frost Kingdom. People were still talking about Whiterun. It was said that the mayor of Whiterun had pulled out the legendary dragon-slaying sword and was preparing to gather the army and powerful adventurers to kill the entrenched red dragon. The cunning ancient red dragon had yet to reveal its identity, so Soren knew the fate of the mayor of Whiterun almost without thinking. He just hoped that this time there wouldn't be too big of a deviation, and Whiterun wouldn't decline so quickly. Because the decline of Whiterun meant that the environment in the surrounding area began to deteriorate, and other races gradually launched attacks on humans. Humans had a greedy nature. If they were strong enough, other races would naturally retreat, but once they declined, hatred and desire would reignite the flames of war. Soren sat in the room and pondered, playing with the elemental stone, water, in his hand. Item type, elemental stone, water, item grade, legendary, grade 1. Item description, a special treasure from the water elemental plane, a stone formed by the spirituality of the water elemental. It has been endowed with special magic, and when activated, it can cast powerful spells. It doesn't seem to be a single item. From the patterns on the edge, it can be seen that it used to be part of something. Requirements, none. Special effects, summon water elemental 7 days once, ice storm 3 days once. Compared to the earth elemental stone, the water elemental stone was a little less practical. The water elemental it summoned was much weaker than the earth elemental, and its speed was not as fast as the wind elemental. However, its combat power in the sea was amazing. Among the 4 elemental summons, the fire elemental was the most practical because it was a burning flame. As long as it walked around, it could cause damage to the enemy, and it had a crushing effect on many weak enemies. As for the spell, Ice Storm, it was an AoE spell. Although it was not as good as Soren's stone skin, it was still useful. Ice Storm, level 4 spell summons an ice storm to deal AoE damage to enemies within 20 to 40 meters. Enemies in the area will receive 18 points of blunt damage and 12 points of cold damage. Enemies in the area will receive -4 points of attack and have their movement speed reduced. The effect of the reduced movement speed is determined by the enemy's constitution. This spell's damage was not as good as the level 3 fireball spell. However, it had one advantage: it could freeze the enemy and affect their movement speed. It was a relatively common spell. P.S. Today's update. Chapter 394. After passing through the edge of the misty forest, the land gradually became barren. The misty forest was a special place. There was a certain dead magic area here. Simply put, it was a place where the elemental energy was chaotic and there were loopholes in the magic net. Spellcasters would be affected here and might fail to cast spells or even cause confusion. Most of these places were very dangerous because of the strong energy radiation and the appearance of powerful mutant creatures. The depths of the misty forest was the place where the gods fell. A powerful god once fell here, and there were very few people who could enter so far. It was difficult for even the incarnation of the gods. Only a small number of legendary droll could connect there with dreams. There were some fragmentary rumors back then. It was rumored that the depths of the misty forest were connected to a divine kingdom, a huge half-bit wall directly embedded in the material plane. Unfortunately, no one had been able to confirm this. The wind and sand gradually became more violent. After entering the Gobi Desert, everything in front of him gradually became desolate. This Gobi Desert was the territory of the gnolls, and there were many gnolls active here. Many of the half-baked wild monsters in the hinterland of the continent had advanced into professions due to the harsh living environment. And there was the belief of the Lord of the Abyss, King of the Gnolls, Yeenagu, the demon lord of the 422nd floor of the Abyss, one of the most powerful gnolls. Perhaps it was not a powerful Lord of the Abyss, but no one could underestimate it. This was because its archenemies were the Succubus Queen and the Tauren King. To be able to fight against these two archenemies for thousands of years without falling, it was either very lucky or it really had some tricks up its sleeve. The King of the Gnolls was not a very complicated Lord of the Abyss, because Soren had been to its territory before. Its lifelong goal was to make the gnolls prosperous. For this reason, it hunted as many weak creatures as possible or plotted against some enemies. Unfortunately, the gnolls were born to rely on hunting for food, which was destined to make their numbers difficult to prosper. A gust of wind blew. The gnoll scouts' excellent tracking ability allowed them to find Soren walking alone in the Gobi Desert. They carefully lurked behind and communicated with him in a special way. They were smart enough to understand that people traveling alone were not so easy to deal with, but their desire for flesh and blood still made them feel restless. Swoosh! A sharp arrow flew out. To avoid trouble, Soren took out his elven war bow and shot an arrow at a gnoll scout's shoulder. Due to the direction of the wind, the arrow deviated and should have hit the gnoll scout's head. An appropriate display of strength could reduce trouble. Whoa! A series of screams rang out. The Jackallan scouts finally realized that the target in front of them was not something they could deal with. These creatures quickly retreated into the desert. The further they went into the Gobi Desert, the fewer traces of plants there were. In the end, Soren began to see a desert in front of him. It was a desolate scene with yellow sand filling the sky. There was almost no greenery in sight. This was a disaster brought by the Arcane Empire. Many of the once glorious cities were now buried under the yellow sand. Part of the reason was humans. In the past, the land had been severely deforested, so much so that there were no traces of plants left. The rivers dried up and the land became desertified. Humans had migrated from this place after excessive destruction, leaving only other creatures to occupy this place. Beyond this desert was the Eastern Kingdom. This was the largest desert in the material plane. It would take a few days to reach this place even if he used flight. Soren's goal was to reach the inner part of the desert. To do so, he needed to find a city in the desert. Oasis. Since the environment began to deteriorate, some of the noble droll came here. They formed the legendary tree shepherds, and had been trying to create greenery in this harsh desert for hundreds of years. This was a very difficult task because it was difficult to repair the deteriorated environment. Moreover, there were still remnants of radiation in many places. The tree shepherds were another branch of the droll. They rarely interfered with the affairs of the continent. Their task was to plant plants and build oases in the desert. These tree shepherds had a very high reputation in the desert. They were the ones who built the oases on the eastern trade route. Note, the details are mentioned near the Elven Kingdom. Finding an oasis was not easy. This place was unfamiliar to Soren as well. He could only rely on flight to determine the direction and follow the traces of life in this barren land. The first day, he had to spend the night on the sand dunes and continue his journey in the morning. As they gradually went deeper into the desert, some dilapidated buildings appeared in front of them. They were magnificent buildings that looked like the pyramids of Egypt. Unfortunately, they were now damaged beyond recognition. They were surrounded by yellow sand. If they wanted to enter, they could only dig out a tunnel. This was very dangerous. Soren had almost been buried by the quicksand in the past. The land under his feet used to be a city, but it was now an ancient ruin in the desert. Apart from the occasional adventurer who came here to look for wealth, no one would easily enter this place. This was because there were too many dangers. This desert had buried almost a third of the cities of the Arcane Empire. There were also ancient monsters that were sealed here. Exploring this place was equivalent to exploring a city. It was a very large project. Most of the time you could not even find the way out. You had to dig a path yourself. The most dangerous place was the Eastern Kingdom. There were many ancient ruins under the monks' monastery. Many of them were sealed with terrifying monsters. Half a day passed just like that. Soren finally saw a green area in front of him. This was because he saw a river in the desert. Tall trees were neatly distributed on both sides of the river. These were not natural trees. They were planted and modified by humans. The work of tree shepherds. Since he found a river, it meant that there was an oasis nearby. Soren could not help but quicken his pace and move forward. A city wall made of sand and stone appeared. A tall flagpole was erected at the city gate. This place was completely different from the hinterland of the continent. The whole city was surrounded by sand and wind. The traveling caravans did not use horses. Instead, they used camels. The camels were carrying heavy goods. Beside them, there were Eastern merchants wearing Arabian-style clothes. Many of the surrounding buildings were built with sand and stone, giving off a rough and desolate feeling. Soren entered the city in the desert. Chapter 395. There were a lot of pedestrians in the town. The city in the desert was called Hadar, which meant, the Watcher of the Desert. It was an ancient language from the east, and many wizards probably didn't understand it. Soren felt like he was back in the Middle Ages in the western region. The mixed population was a bit like Jerusalem with both desert people and Westerners, and they were trading with different accents. Merchants from the east were reluctant to enter the western continent, so most of their goods were sold in the cities on the edge of the desert. After coming here, Soren realized that he had forgotten a very important thing. That was to learn the language proficiency spell. Damn that dialect. Although there were many people who knew the common language, the main language was still the Eastern one, and there were also some dialects from the desert. He didn't have a translation system, so he could only understand a little bit of what was said. It was troublesome for him to communicate normally. Fortunately, he was just passing by, so he could only talk to merchants who knew the common language. The buildings in the city were domed, and the most eye-catching one was the Desert Temple. It was the Church of the God of Death. The clergy of death had always been an important field for the gods to fight for, so almost every pantheon had a god who was involved in the field of death. The desert temple in front of him was the church of the eastern goddess of wealth and death, Nefertis. Soren saw a golden bowl at the top of the temple, with the emblem of the ring of life floating above it. It was a goddess of the chaotic good alignment, and the clergy of the guardian of the dead extended from the field of death. It was the kind of clergy that protected the dead from being disturbed. Therefore, the followers of this goddess were not difficult to deal with. The Eastern gods were outsiders during the ancient empire, and no one knew where they came from. However, the ancient empire had once kidnapped a large number of people from other worlds, and that was how the Eastern desert gods were born. For a long time, the Eastern desert gods rarely interfered with the struggles of other gods. Even during the chaotic era of the Arcane Empire, they were just bystanders. The belief of these gods was limited to the desert, and the Eastern kingdoms were blind spots. Because of the influence of the monks, the Eastern kingdoms were more inclined to believe in the Tao of nature, rather than a specific god. This Tao was a bit like the so-called heavenly Tao. However, it was not the same as the heavenly Tao that people knew of. Instead, it was a Tao that leaned more towards the spiritual. Martial monks pursued personal sublimation. If one had to use a word to describe it, Soren thought that it should be the so-called unity of man and nature. In any case, he still could not tell the difference between the spiritual transcendence pursued by the nature droll and the warrior monks. From his point of view, the will of the heavens and nature were basically the same thing. Soren wasn't the kind of person who was too rigid in the spiritual world. There was a passage that went like this. It was a book written by a droll wanderer who traveled to the Eastern Kingdom. This droll wanderer eventually became a powerful legendary champion. In addition to daily training, the monks' cultivation is mainly spiritual. They had a direct and mysterious connection with the spiritual world and could feel the mysteries of nature through meditation. Therefore, they did not need priests or gods. In the process of traveling to the east, I saw many powerful monks. They did not know any magic at all, but they could master many magical abilities through cultivation. This ability did not come from the gods, nor was it any arcane magic that I knew of. It was more like a gift from nature to the cultivators. I think this is another kind of Tao of nature. Therefore, I decided to join them and use my cultivation as a monk to explore the mysteries of nature. Soren temporarily found a hotel to stay in and then prepared to inquire about some information. It was quite difficult to find a place in the vast desert. Even Soren himself only knew the general direction. If no one had explored the place as a pioneer, he might have to dig a hole. Because his next target, the anti-detection cloak, was in the underground ruins, and it was buried in the depths of the desert. Exploring this kind of underground ruins was not like finding a random dungeon to explore. It was more like excavating an archaeological discovery. The specific operation could be compared to the European plunderers who excavated the Egyptian pyramids. The first batch of underground ruins were almost all excavated by the adventurers. The geographical environment of the desert did not allow for an entrance for thousands of years. Soren wandered in this desert city. Here he could see adventurers from the east. Every year, there would be monks embarking on the journey of cultivation, visiting the droll church on the other side of the continent, and learning from other professions. These were their daily practice. The number of monks increased as he approached the east, but most of them still kept their hair. Only those who were prepared to strictly abide by the commandments of the monks, or those who had made the poverty oath, would shave their hair. Violence. If it's not for justice, then it's meaningless. Soren first walked around the place, but when he was about to return to the hotel to rest, there was a sudden commotion in front of him. Then a loud and hoarse voice came from the front, and he could not help but stop. There were many people gathered in front of him. It seemed that it was human nature to like to watch a commotion. There were many people in front of him. Even the nearby guards were attracted, but they did not mean to stop it. The expressions on their faces seemed to be a little overwhelmed. Soren also walked over quietly. Then, in front of him appeared a paladin with a face full of vicissitudes. From his face, he looked vaguely young, but the wind and frost on his body were too strong, making him look at least 10 years older. The paladin was wearing a shabby silver armor and a fish-scale gauntlet on his wrist. In front of him was a man dressed as a desert warrior. The man's scimitar was held in his hand. He couldn't stab it in and couldn't pull it out at all. The paladin's face made Soren a little stunned. Then he seemed to remember something and his expression changed slightly. Judgment of justice. Facing the desert warrior in front of him, a white light appeared in the palm of the paladin's hand. He suddenly let go of his palm, pulled out the two-handed sword at his waist, and pointed it at the enemy in front of him. A blood-red light appeared. The man standing in front of the paladin appeared with an evil aura. This blood-red aura startled the others. Anyone with a little knowledge could not help but step back because the desert warrior in front of them was a person with bloody hands. It's a desert bandit? He's one of the skeleton desert bandits. A merchant next to him seemed to remember something, and then said in an angry and scared voice, "They rob the passing merchants and never leave anyone alive." The paladin did not care about the others around him. He looked at the man in front of him and said in a low voice, "A week ago, you attacked a caravan from Oasis City and killed 27 innocent people. You should pay for the crimes you have committed." The paladin held the heavy greatsword in both hands and slashed out. The desert warrior in front of him waved his sword rather awkwardly, but his whole body flew out directly. Bang! His body hit the wall behind him, and he could not help but spit out a trace of blood. Justice. Either by force or by the law. The paladin waved his greatsword again and said in a low voice, "But the law here seems to be protecting you, so I can only rely on force to uphold justice." A faint aura appeared on the greatsword he held in both hands. When the paladin waved his sword again, "Kacha!" A crisp breaking sound was heard. The desert bandit in front of him was directly cut off and died instantly under his sword. Evil slash. The paladin glanced at the others and paused for a moment when he passed by Soren, but he quickly looked away. He did not recognize Soren. He came to the body of the desert bandit, leaned over the body and whispered a few words in a special language. Then he looked at the stiff guards around him, picked up the body with one hand and walked out of the city. The others did not hear what he just said. However, when Soren heard the strange language, he could not help but be startled because he was very familiar with this passage. This was a very ancient language. It was impossible to even find out where it came from, but the translation was roughly like this. "In the name of justice, avenge the weak." In the creed of the paladin there was a very important sentence. "Sympathize with the weak, protect the women and children." Perhaps even Soren himself did not expect that his words would really let the young paladin he met in the City of Wealth embark on the road to become a holy avenger. But it seemed that he had not completed his test because the real holy avenger was not what Soren saw now. But from him, Soren had seen that he had completed a lot of training because the holy avenger also had the test of asceticism. The real holy avenger was close to the legendary level. Although the sword he waved just now was very strong, there was still a big gap between it and the avenger in Soren's memory. And his weapon was not an imitation of the holy avenger, but an ordinary two-handed greatsword. This meant that he had not obtained the real qualification yet. The paladin left alone. No one dared to stop him. The city guards just looked at the paladin carrying the desert bandit's body with one hand and then watched him go away. Any city had dark corners. The goods looted by the desert bandits eventually needed a place to sell. Soren watched the paladin leave, and his eyes seemed to move slightly, then he quietly followed him. Chapter 396. Soren was far behind. The other party's strength was not what it used to be. If he got too close he might be discovered. As soon as the paladin left the city, Soren noticed that someone was rushing outside. He had openly killed a skeleton desert bandit in the city, and it seemed to be a leader. It was almost impossible for him to leave the city without being retaliated against. Desert bandits ranked first among the mountain bandits everywhere, and their fierceness was not far from that of pirates. Pirates' desire for revenge was very strong. Since this city sheltered the desert bandits and sold their stolen goods here, it was absolutely impossible for there to be only one member here. The paladin left alone. The possibility of being caught by them outside the city could be said to be more than 80%. That was why Soren quietly followed. He didn't like to help others, but he also didn't want the paladin to die here, so he decided to follow behind and see. If the paladin was not a match for the desert bandits, then he would intervene in this matter. However, seeing the paladin leave so calmly, it seemed that he also had some confidence. The wind and sand became a little stronger. The paladin's speed was not fast, which made Soren wonder if he was deliberately slowing down to wait for the desert bandits to catch up with him. Sure enough, about an hour later, a sound of horse hooves came from afar, and then dozens of masked desert bandits gradually approached from the side of the sand dune and divided into two groups to surround the paladin and block his retreat. Kill? The cold-blooded and fierce desert bandits did not have the slightest superfluous words. There was basically no possibility of them sitting down and talking with the kind paladin. Because under the command of a desert bandit who seemed to be the leader, the other desert bandits shouted and rushed forward. Some of them sped up and rushed down with swords, while others took out their bows and aimed at the target. The number of desert bandits was nearly 40, and it looked like a bandit group. With so many people, even a legend would feel a little tricky. Looks like he's in trouble. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly but did not move at all. He had to make sure that the paladin was not courting death. If he did not even anticipate the situation in front of him, then he was completely courting death. Such a person was not worth saving at all. Because in the end he would still die. Charge. With a clang, the young paladin threw away the corpse of the desert bandit he was carrying, and then rushed forward with his greatsword in both hands, roaring, "You are guilty! Get rid of all evil!" A holy radiance that seemed to have materialized appeared. The sacred warrior's body seemed to be shrouded in some kind of energy. He waved his giant sword and rushed forward. In an instant he swung his sword horizontally. Accompanied by the whine of a horse, he directly cut down a desert bandit and his horse. "Justice be with me." Dur's hand. The paladin pressed his palms down on the two-handed greatsword, and the seemingly ordinary two-handed greatsword actually separated from the middle, turning into two one-handed greatswords. He held the sword hilt and soared into the air. In an instant, another 2 desert bandits were beheaded on the spot. Dance of Death. The whirlwind created by the single-handed greatsword was even more frightening than Soren's spinning strike. It could be said that all the enemies that were caught in the whirlwind were split in half. Blood, corpses, broken limbs. At this moment, the violence shown by the young paladin seemed to have a tyrannical aura. This was the Holy Avenger, in Soren's memory. Clang, clang. The arrow hit the paladin's body, but it failed to penetrate his silver-white armor. He blocked the oncoming arrow with his fish-scale gauntlet, and then suddenly accelerated toward the archer in front of him. Justice. Holy. Courage. The young paladin pressed his hand on the sand. The cunning desert bandits immediately turned around and retreated when they found him approaching. It was difficult to catch up with these enemies on foot. However, the next moment the sacred warrior seemed to have launched some kind of special ability. With the holy white light turned into a summoning circle, a tall white horse rushed out of it. Superior Summon Mount. Celestial Horse. The white horse rushed out of the summoning circle. The sacred warrior turned over and jumped on the horse's back. There was no need for him to guide at all. The celestial horse automatically chased after the enemy under telepathy. This was a warhorse from the upper plane. Only a few professions could summon it, and the sacred warrior happened to be one of them. They were stronger and smarter than the warhorses in the material plane. They were a creature of the upper plane with a creature level of 10 or above. Blood splashed. The sacred warrior rushed into the group of desert bandits like a hot knife through butter. Soon the enemies were cut down one by one. Clang, clang. The young sacred warrior was like a ruthless reaper. He had no mercy like the other sacred warriors. His moves were fierce and ruthless. He was even more aggressive than Soren when he reaped the enemy. Almost none of the enemies who died under his greatsword survived. Even if 1 or 2 desert bandits knelt down and begged for mercy after being shot down, he did not hesitate at all. He directly swung his sword and cut off the enemy's head. The fierce battle was still going on. The sacred warrior gradually had more wounds on his body under the siege of the desert bandits. Even the strong celestial horse was a little breathless at the moment because it was shot in the abdomen. Hand of Healing. The holy light emerged. After the sacred warrior felt the holy energy, he could use it to heal injuries. However, the healing effect was not as good as that of a priest. This ability could only be used once a day, but the holy energy could be used separately. The paladin wasn't healing himself, but the celestial horse he was riding. He let out a low roar and suddenly jumped down from the horse's back, swinging his sword horizontally. His power was a little weak. Without entering the realm of legends, he could not master powerful legendary abilities such as armor skin, legendary health, legendary battle skills, perfect constitution, and so on. This made his explosive power unable to be supported enough. The desert bandits suffered heavy casualties, but after finding that the sacred warrior was weak, they rushed up again. Sacrifice, glory, unyielding. The young sacred warrior still looked resolute. He put the 2 one-handed greatswords together again, then took a deep breath and roared, "Judgment!" Sword form, cross slash. The ruthless and overbearing sword light appeared, and the enemies who rushed in front of him were instantly cut into 4 neat pieces. Soren's pupils shrank slightly, and his expression suddenly became a little surprised. Advanced swordsmanship. There were not many abilities in this world that could be called advanced swordsmanship. The complete White Raven tactics was one of them, but Soren had not really mastered it until now because he did not have a complete learning program. Sword form, cross/, was another advanced swordsmanship. Its origin was the crusade against pagans. The complete version should be called silver cross swordsmanship. This kind of swordsmanship was beyond the scope of mortals, and it could even touch the field of chi like the sword saint. This chi was difficult to describe in words, but it could be roughly explained by an example. A sword saint who was close to the legendary level, under the condition of using chi/, swinging his sword at a wooden pile 5 meters away, could instantly split the wooden pile into 2 halves without touching it. If you really wanted to say something, perhaps it could be understood as sword chi. This ability was very difficult to practice. Basically, anyone who mastered it had gone through a long period of hard work. Basically, the difficulty was similar to that of a sword saint that Soren once saw slashing water with a sword. The young paladin did not use the complete version of silver cross swordsmanship, but the power of each strike was as fierce as a sword saint who activated chi/. The more powerful the move, the more it would consume the body. Soren could see that he was close to the end of his rope, but when he was about to secretly help the paladin, he suddenly seemed to feel something and retreated into the shadows. Judgment. Another incomparably burly figure appeared. It was a very tall man who was close to 2.4 meters tall. He looked like a small giant. He held a war hammer in one hand and rushed in like a tiger into a flock of sheep. Wherever he went, there were instantly corpses everywhere. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 desert bandits were killed by his hands. This incomparably tall man held a heavy war hammer in one hand and a thick book with a metallic luster in the other. He was expressionless, but he ruthlessly and cruelly slaughtered the desert bandits in front of him. Almost none of the desert bandits present could withstand a single blow from him. All of them were killed in one blow, leaving no survivors. Soren was shocked. He looked at the burly man in front of him and murmured in his heart, "Warden? Warden." A legendary paladin, the mentor of the Holy Avengers, and also their training instructor. Very good. The warden glanced at the corpses all over the ground, then his eyes fell on the young paladin. He slowly said, "Although it's a little worse than I expected, it's already good enough that you can do this with your strength. Young man, you've passed my test here." A paladin with a professional level of around 16 dealt with a group of desert bandits alone and killed 2/3 of the enemies. This record could be said to be glorious. The young paladin knelt down on one knee and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, Warden." The burly man glanced at him, and suddenly his face changed slightly. He said in a dignified voice, "Is that rogue nearby? Please come out and meet me." Was I discovered? What a strong sense. Soren took back his footsteps and slowly walked out from behind the sand dune. The Holy Avengers had been hiding in the Gobi area. They were active in the desert most of the time. Because they also belonged to the Order faction, the paladins of this organization also received some training techniques from the Eastern monks. This may be the reason why he could discover Soren. Listen to the wind to determine the location. Chapter 397. There were many special training methods in the Eastern world. For example, the ascetics of the East had a special ability called wisdom, which was more powerful than the legendary ability sixth sense. In addition, the training methods of the Eastern monks could also give many additional abilities such as fleetfoot, wind detection, hidden weapon deflection, and so on. Many of these abilities were universal and could be mastered by other professions. Among them, Droll and Blade Master were the professions that learned the most from the monks. The warden in front of him should also have mastered some special ability. He was able to find Soren's trace when he just moved, so he didn't need to continue hiding. He walked out directly and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency. Long time no see." Hearing Soren's words, the warden's clenched warhammer fell slightly and frowned. "Who are you? Have we met before?" Soren's words were a psychological hint that they had met before. In this way, the possibility of the opponent directly attacking him was very low, which made it easier for him to say what he wanted to say next. "We met a long time ago." Soren glanced at the paladin next to him. The young paladin did not recognize him because Soren was wearing a cloak at the moment. At that time, Soren did not have the momentum he had now. As long as Soren was not willing to expose himself, even people who had met him before would not recognize him easily. He glanced at the warden in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Actually, I'm just passing by. But since I've met your Excellency, I'm going to make a deal with you." "A deal?" The warden's expression was a little surprised and he said in a low voice, What deal? The one in front of him should be a legendary rogue. Whether he was evil or not, he was not sure of winning. And fighting with a legendary rogue, the paladin next to him was likely to be affected. He did not want a young seed to fall here. The number of holy avengers was very small. Most of the paladins were gathered under the Lord of Light. Compared with the avengers who were fierce and decisive, the Lord of Light's deal was more in line with the beliefs of the paladins. For example, exterminating all evil was one of the creeds of the holy avengers. They advocated cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, showing no mercy to the enemy, but other saint samurai advocated treating captives well, not attacking the unarmed. Those who have committed lesser sins can be forgiven if they repent, and so on. Using the desert bandits in front of him as an example, the holy avengers would kill them all, while the orthodox paladins might let some of them go. Soren stared at him and said in a low voice, "I heard a piece of news by chance. Perhaps this information will be very useful to you. However, if you want to get information from me, you have to pay a price. It just so happens that I have a favor to ask of you." Thieves' Union? Or rogues from other organizations? The warden frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "What news? What do you want?" Soren smiled and said, "I accidentally heard a piece of news during my travels. I know where the gem on the Holy Avenger, Karsamir, is. I know you've always wanted to repair this divine artifact, so I thought you'd be interested in this news." Holy Avenger. The warden was a little shocked when he heard this. He couldn't help but take a step forward, locked his eyes on Soren in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Are you sure you know where Karsamir is?" Holy Avenger, Karsamir. A +5 divine artifact, and one of the most powerful weapons in the mortal world. However, it was not complete now because this divine artifact still lacked the most important part, which was the Eye of Tyr. The eye of the previous God of Justice. This eye was similar to a gem. It could be used to repair the Holy Avenger Karsamir and turn it into a real divine artifact. For a long time, the Holy Avenger organization had been looking for its whereabouts, but unfortunately there had been no clues. Naturally, Soren had never seen this eyeball before, but there were clues about it in his memory. That was something that Soren couldn't get at the moment, but he didn't mind telling the warden in advance. "What do you want?" The warden's expression gradually calmed down and he said in a deep voice, "I'm curious about what a rogue would want from us." He believed it. Because if it was an ordinary profession who said this, he would probably scoff, but if it was a legendary rogue, then the credibility was quite high. Among many professions, rogues were the easiest to inquire about information. "It's nothing important." Soren glanced at him and said slowly, "I know that your organization has been active in the Gobi Desert for so many years. I want a map here, but not an ordinary map. I want a map of those ancient ruins. One of the ruins has something I need, so this is a fair deal." There were many dangerous ancient ruins in the desert. Many places were remnants of the Arcane Empire. The paladins also secretly monitored these places to prevent the terrible monsters sealed in them from appearing. The energy radiation had produced many mutant creatures. The existence of ancient evil creatures had always been a great enemy of the Eastern world, and the paladins also shouldered part of the responsibility of the Eastern monks. Map. The warden was silent. As Soren said, this was not something too important. The worst result was that the rogue in front of him had opened some dangerous places. Even without a map, if a legendary rogue insisted on looking, he could still find what he was looking for. "Where is it?" The warden looked at Soren and said in a deep voice, "Tell me where it is first. I'll have someone send the map to you." The paladin's words were more reliable. Soren glanced at him and said slowly, "In a beholder's nest in the Underdark, it is currently in the hands of a Death-Eye tyrant. With your ability, you should be able to ask a legendary wizard to use prophecy. As long as you use prophecy, you can know the truth of the news. As for the specific location, I'll tell you when the map is sent." Prophecy had great limitations. But as long as there were certain clues, it would not be so difficult to determine whether it was true or false. Even if he couldn't directly predict the location of Tyr's eye, he could do it in another way. For example, whether or not the Holy Avenger, Karsamir, was there, whether or not an item from the God of Justice, Tyr, was in its hands, or using another method to make the prophecy. As long as there were clues, there were many things that could not be completely covered by magic shielding. The paladin in front of him could determine the truth of the news as long as he changed his method. Of course, this was the case where Soren was telling the truth, and the legendary prophecy could only be confirmed. If there was nothing he said, it was basically impossible to get any clues just by using Tyr's eye to prophecy. The warden looked at Soren deeply and then said in a deep voice, "Okay. As long as the news is true, the things you want will be sent soon. Let's go." The legendary paladin turned and left, as if eager to confirm the authenticity of the news. But before he left, the young paladin couldn't help but look at Soren a few more times, as if he felt that he was a little familiar. Although Soren didn't say the specific location, as long as the news was true, the Holy Avenger's strength could still be found. But the price would be huge and they had to find the Death Eye tyrant in the Underdark first. Even the warden in front of him might not have much confidence in dealing with such a monster, not to mention that he had an eye from a god in his hands. A day passed quickly. The Holy Avenger's movements were fast. Almost at noon on the second day, Soren got what he wanted. A map marked with most of the ruins in the desert. Soren could determine whether it was true at a glance because even if he wasn't too familiar with the terrain of the desert, he still had some impressions of the locations of the ruins that were tracked by many adventurers in the past. He vaguely remembered more than 70% of the desert ruins on the map. As for the place he wanted to go, it was naturally marked on the map. There was a baler in the deepest part of the ruins, and there was an obvious mark on the map. Soren's memory coincided with this because the Holy Avenger was among the people who sealed the baler. This was a baler with a monster level of 27. The thing Soren was looking for wasn't in the place where it was trapped, so it shouldn't have much interaction with this monster. Nearly half of the things on the map were marked. From golems, evil creatures, demons all the way to devils, there were many places where things were clearly marked. Such a map was only in the hands of a small number of powerful organizations, and he only got half of it in the Eastern world. Soren told them what he knew. As for whether they could get it or not, it was up to the paladins. The Underdark was full of danger and it wasn't easy for them to enter. It must be a legendary party to complete the mission. Now that I've got it. Soren didn't need to stay here, so he went directly to the underground ruins. But before that, he needed to hire some people to find a way to dig a passage into the ruins. Although these ancient ruins were buried by the desert, many things inside were still intact. If necessary, Soren could dig a passage himself. Of course. He definitely needed to prepare some tools in advance and see if he could recruit some cannon fodder. Chapter 398. The Pearl of the Desert. This was a city very close to the Eastern world, and it was also the border of the Desert of Death. If you continued to go east from here, you would enter the Desert of Death. It was a very dangerous place, and it was also the gathering place of Naruto's believers. There were many clergies in the realm of death, but the most evil were undoubtedly the believers of Naruto. This ancient god was known as the enemy of good, the abomination of life, the emissary of darkness, the king of gloom, the reaper of flesh and blood, and so on. Since he appeared until now, although he had risen and fallen many times, he still had not fallen. This was one of the few surviving ancient gods of death. Naruto's believers did not need a reason to attack others, because their doctrine was to reap lives. This god of death hated life and hated living creatures. Soren's figure came here. In this bustling desert city, there were not many people like him from the mainland. This was the territory of the desert people, and people of other races rarely went too deep. In the center of the city was a towering palace, and the walls on all sides were carved with exquisite reliefs. At the top of the palace was a huge statue of the undead bird. It was said that the undead bird once appeared here and was reborn in the flames, so this place had always been a thorn in Naruto's side. There were many people in the Adventurers Guild. Soren unexpectedly saw elves, dwarves, and halflings, but most of the elves who came here were droll. Since the Eastern monks' practice spread to the mainland, many droll would travel to the Eastern countries. "What can I do for you?" An Eastern woman with a veil and a slender waist appeared in front of Soren. She was the receptionist of the Adventurers Guild. Because of the different regions, it was naturally different from the mainland. Don't underestimate this woman. Soren saw at a glance that she was an advanced Oriental dancer. In her exotic dress, there were at least a dozen deadly throwing knives hidden. An advanced profession similar to the clown dancer. The Oriental dancer was proficient in some of the fighting skills of the bards, and at the same time she had received a small number of training methods from the monks. These women's movements were fierce and deadly, and sometimes they would also act as assassins. They were very good at using their beauty and charming dance moves to confuse the enemy. Even in battle they were like dancing fairies. This was an advanced profession that required a lot of talent. Not only did it require agility, it also required charm. There were many special advanced professions in the Eastern world. Soren only needed to glance around to find 2 or 3 special advanced professions, including the Ronin near the Eastern Sea. An advanced variant of the Ranger class, a dangerous group of people who were proficient in swordsmanship. I want to issue a recruitment mission. Soren glanced at the Oriental dancer in front of him, raised his hand, took out a task list, and handed it to the woman in front of him. The Oriental dancer glanced at him, looked up at him with her blue eyes and whispered, "Exploring the ancient ruins? Mission difficulty level C? We'll need to recruit some experts. The cost is 1,000 Kindler. We'll announce your information. If someone wants to take this mission, we'll send someone to inform you. Please leave us your current address." Soren quickly left the location of the hotel, then glanced at the adventurer's hall, turned around and walked towards the hotel. He still needed to learn some new spells, and it was not easy to recruit a group of experts. Low-level professions were not even qualified to be cannon fodder in the ancient ruins. Soren was going to stay here for 3 days. As Soren's figure left, the Oriental dancer quickly entered the back of the hall. A middle-aged man with a beard was sitting inside. After glancing outside, he said in a low voice, "Where did he come from?" The Oriental dancer glanced at him and said slowly, "A high-grade rogue. Good skills. He should be from the south. He has the smell of the sea. It's the same smell as that Ronin. I guess he used to be a person who drifted on the sea all year round. I don't know why such a rogue would come to the desert." Observing people's expressions, the Oriental dancer was very good at collecting information. Her knowledge was no worse than that of the bards. As long as it won't cause trouble. The middle-aged man glanced at the mission list and said in a deep voice, "Exploring the ancient ruins? Every year these adventurers come here to die. They don't know what's in the depths of the desert." The Oriental dancer shrugged her shoulders and said playfully, "What can we do if they want to die? We can't stop them." Soon, the mission announcement was posted. Because it was a sea-level mission, the position was quite obvious. Exploring the ancient ruins? Recruiting experienced veterans? The reward is at least 5,000 Kindler? The person who posted it is a rogue? It looks like the reward is quite good. The announcement quickly attracted a lot of people's attention. However, most of them weighed their own strength and chose to give up because many of them were mercenary groups. At most, they would take on the task of escorting caravans. This kind of ancient ruin exploration was too dangerous. Even if the reward was good, they were not sure. Most professions still wanted to be safe. It looks good. A bearded dwarf in heavy armor glanced at it, then put down his axe and said in a deep voice, "Maybe we can talk to this rogue." Taking on a mission was naturally not that simple. Not many veterans would make a decision easily. They must know the specific content of the mission. Another person who was attracted by the mission was the Oriental Ronin sitting in the corner. There was a jug next to him and he had been wiping his blade. After hearing the movements of others, he looked at it seriously. 5,000 Kindler. It was already a very generous reward, enough to make a professional like him excited. Spellcasters were as rare as ever. There was not a single wizard in the whole Adventurers Guild, not even a warlock. The droll did not seem to be interested in this kind of mission. They had always rejected the act of exploring the underground because they thought it could easily cause disasters. Many of the droll here were tree shepherds, not droll of the warlock fighting school. The polarization of strength was more serious. 3 days passed quickly. Soren recruited some useful veterans with generous rewards, a dwarven heavy shield warrior, an Oriental Ronin, and a desert warrior. Including Soren, there were 4 people in total. It was a relatively good team. The only shortcoming was that they still lacked a priest. High-grade priests were as difficult to recruit as ever. These guys had high status and rarely took risks to make money. Because he could not recruit spellcasters, Soren had to delay the time. Although he didn't care very much, these temporarily recruited teammates hoped to have a spellcaster around so that they would be safer. In the end, Soren had to raise the reward to 8,000 Kindler. Unfortunately, this still did not make the spellcasters interested. In desperation, he could only turn this investment to buying supplies from the desert temple. Expensive healing potions were more or less useful. The potions made by priests could reach the effect of heal serious injuries at most, but the price was not cheap. Just as Soren was considering whether to find a way to recruit a high-grade profession to make up the numbers and make up a 5-person adventurer team, a small accident happened. Someone actually took the initiative to find him and was ready to accept this mission. It was a woman. A very beautiful and dangerous woman. Time went back to a day ago. Soren was just about to return to his hotel. He went out today and hired a group of workers to dig a passage to the underground ruins with tools. But just as he walked to the door of the hotel room, Soren's expression suddenly became serious, and then he put his hand on his curved sword. Someone had touched his door. Before leaving, Soren left a very slight mark, but now this mark was not symmetrical. The door had been opened. Soren told the innkeeper not to clean up the room, so there was a high possibility that someone else had sneaked in. There was no sound in the room. Soren was sure that if there was someone inside, the other party could hear his footsteps upstairs. He reached out and grabbed the door handle. Then he took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open. There was nothing unusual in the room, but Soren could find that the things placed on the table were slightly offset. The distance was about 1 or 2 millimeters. If it wasn't for his amazing observation and memory, it would be impossible to find out that someone had come in and rummaged through his things. Squeak. Soren gently closed the door. He did not relax his vigilance because he could not see anyone in the room. There were many masters who were proficient in sneaking in this world, and there were many people who were not worse than him. Swoosh. There was a slight sound of something breaking through the air. Soren's body tensed up for a moment, then he rolled sideways and pulled out his curved sword with a clang. There was a strange throwing knife at the door. It looked like a twisting snake and it was aimed at Soren's throat. There was a slight sound of wind. In the dim light of the room, a hazy figure appeared. With the sound of breaking through the air again, 5 throwing knives came from different angles, blocking all of Soren's escape routes. Down. Soren instantly blocked the enemy's attack with his sword. At the same time he jumped over. His figure disappeared strangely when he was in the air, and suddenly appeared behind the hazy black shadow. Shadow leap. Shadow strike. Soren did not show any mercy and all of his attacks were fatal. Giggle. At this moment, the strange figure made a crisp and charming laugh, and then the hazy shadow divided into 3 and dodged in 3 directions at the same time. Hazy dance. Illusion. The strong and tall figure turned over and tapped the roof lightly with her toes, then swooped down and stabbed out a black dagger. The Oriental Dancer. Soren's brows furrowed tightly. Facing the figure rushing down from the roof, he suddenly closed his eyes. His ears twitched and without even looking at the attack above, he swung his sword at the foot of the bed. The shadow rushing down from the roof suddenly disappeared, and the corner of the wall was distorted, and a hazy shadow flashed again. Illusion again. The enemy had not appeared so far. Chapter 399. Eastern Illusion. As the birthplace of the monks, the Eastern Kingdom's illusion was not like the Western world, which was mostly mastered by wizards, illusionists. Many of the people here who were proficient in illusion were combat professions, among which the Oriental Dancer was good at using illusion. Many illusions were illusions, but when one's strength reached a certain level the illusions would be real. Even the bards who played tricks would not be much worse than the orthodox spellcasters after advancing to a certain level. The Oriental Dancer could master the ability of mirror image after advancing to a legendary level. Soren did not dare to make any moves, but waited quietly for the other party to make a move, looking for an opportunity. The woman who attacked him was very strong. She was at least a high-grade profession, and there was a possibility that she was a legendary because she obviously had not done her best. Ring. The crisp sound of the bell rang, which seemed to resonate with the heartbeat of people. For a moment, Soren was a little dazed but he quickly recovered. At the same time, 3 phantoms appeared in front of him again. They were wearing light silk dresses and dancing lightly. Although their faces could not be seen clearly, they were full of endless charm. These 3 charming figures were not in a hurry to attack, but surrounded Soren and made a burst of crisp laughter, as if they enjoyed the feeling of fooling the enemy. Shadow leap. Sword form, spinning strike. Soren's figure leaped out, and the scimitar in his hand turned into a cold light as he slashed down. The 3 figures in front of him chuckled, dodged slightly, and then waved their daggers to stab at him. Da. The 3 figures were all real, and they directly blocked Soren's attack. Mirror image? Soren frowned and his expression was quite serious. Enemies who could master the ability of mirror image, even if they were not legendary, would not be too far away. Where was the real body? The combat power of mirror image was very low, less than 1/3 of the real body. Even the legendary sword saint who practiced mirror image could only retain half of his strength at most. These 3 mirror images did not pose much threat to Soren, but the Oriental Dancer hiding in the dark was very dangerous. Soren had not been threatened by this kind of enemy who was proficient in stealth for a long time. What was that smell? Just when Soren was a little at a loss about the enemy's position, his nose suddenly twitched, and then a light burst out of his eyes. He leaped toward the position of the bed. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. Fragrance. There was a faint fragrance in the room. It was the fragrance of a woman. Clang. The sound of weapons clashing could be heard. A pair of snake-shaped daggers suddenly appeared, and a slim figure was forced to reveal herself. She was sent flying a meter away by Soren's explosive force and crashed into the wall of the room. Oh! The hazy shadow gradually became clear, and the figure of the Oriental dancer appeared. She said in a painful voice, "Wait a minute. Stop. I admit defeat. So painful. Bastard. I admit defeat. Don't fight anymore." Soren's eyes were cold and his fierce offensive did not stop at all. After the sword form, beheading, he immediately slashed out horizontally. At the same time he shouted and launched the sword form, spinning strike, sealing all the blind spots of the opponent. Every move was fatal. Although the opponent had admitted defeat, Soren did not mean to stop. Xuanpa. The Oriental dancer's face finally changed. She finally knew what a dangerous enemy she had provoked. She turned around to avoid it. Her slender waist was almost folded in half. Her amazing flexibility allowed her to avoid Soren's attack. At the same time, her figure suddenly disappeared and reappeared behind Soren. "Stop." The Oriental dancer jumped back and said anxiously, "I'm just testing your skills. Not an enemy. I'm going to join your team to earn some money, so I'm here to test you." "Wait a minute. We've met before. In the Adventurers Guild." Clang. The sound of weapons colliding sounded again. Soren frowned and took back his curved sword. He looked at the opponent coldly and said in a deep voice, "Take off your veil." When the Oriental dancer saw him stop, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She first gasped for breath, then frowned and looked at her arm. On her bare white arm there was a faint blood stain. If she had not dodged fast enough, she would have been cut in half by the man in front of her. The Oriental dancer looked at Soren with a strange expression, and then slowly took off her veil, revealing a beautiful face with an exotic Oriental style. There was a small mole at the corner of her eye. Soren looked at the woman in front of him, and his memory ran quickly. After a while, he said in a deep voice, "Who is the Oriental princess to you?" "The Oriental princess?" Soren's words made the woman's face change greatly. She clenched the snake-shaped dagger in an instant and said in a nervous voice, "Who are you? Why do you know this?" Sure enough, it had something to do with the Oriental princess. Soren couldn't help but think of a beautiful figure, which made him touch his ears subconsciously. After he advanced to the legendary rank, he traveled the whole continent and fought with countless legendary powerhouses. He even fought with the incarnations of the gods several times, but he was defeated by a mysterious woman from the east. Not only did he fail the mission, but he also lost nearly 1/3 of the people in the team. In the end, he also lost one of his ears. If he had been a little slower at that time, he would not have lost an ear but his whole head. The Oriental princess. She was an advanced dancer with a profession level of 30+. She was proficient in illusion, mirror image, charm and other abilities. She was good at sneaking, assassination and inquiring about information. She secretly controlled many brothels in the Eastern Kingdom. No one knew her true identity and her alignment could not be judged. She had a very special thing in her hand. It was said that it was a divine artifact passed down from the Eastern Kingdom, which could make people have an ageless face and a long life. "Say it." Soren's eyes were slightly cold. He held the hilt again and said in a deep voice, "Why are you here?" The Oriental dancer in front of him had a complicated expression. She didn't seem to understand why a person from the western part of the continent would know the existence of the Oriental princess. She took a step back gently. After thinking for a moment, she slowly said, "I really just intend to test your skills. I just received information that in the underground ruins you are going to, there is something that Her Excellency is also very interested in. So I was ordered to take it out. I mean no harm. Otherwise, I would have used the ecstasy powder before you entered the room." Ecstasy powder. The effective means of the Oriental dancer could sometimes even defeat legendary powerhouses. "What is it?" Soren frowned and said in a deep voice, "I'm afraid you didn't come here to test my skills, but to steal the information of the underground ruins from me, right?" It seemed that Soren was right. The Oriental dancer in front of him seemed to be avoiding his eyes. During this time, she had been secretly observing Soren's actions and found that many of his preparations seemed to be for certain specific situations. This made her very sure that Soren had specific information about the underground ruins in his hands. If he didn't know the general situation in the underground ruins, he would never deliberately prepare so many things. The Oriental dancer didn't speak. It seemed that she acquiesced to this point. Then she said, "There is one thing in this underground ruins. It is a gem left behind by the Desert Kingdom. My task is to find it. As for the other things, I don't want them. If you think it's okay, maybe we can cooperate. Since you know the existence of Her Excellency, you should also know our strength. With our help, it will be much easier for you to explore the underground ruins, and we also need your information about that place. After all, there is a terrible Baylor demon sealed below." The other party's words made Soren fall into deep thought. For people like Soren, there were basically no eternal enemies. He could even deal with the unpredictable and sinister drows and cooperate with them many times. Now it was not impossible to cooperate with the Oriental dancer in front of him. However, he couldn't believe the woman in front of him, just like he never believed the promise of the drows. The people of the Oriental dancer would not be easier to deal with than the female drows. However, their strength might still be able to be borrowed. Soren was used to the insidiousness and cunning of the drows, so even if the woman in front of him was not very trustworthy, he was still confident in his heart. It was nothing more than using each other and relying on their own means at the critical moment. Although Soren suffered a loss in the hands of the drows in the end, he was also fiercely stabbed by her. When it came to playing tricks, Soren had some confidence in his heart. "Okay." Soren looked at the other party, nodded unexpectedly and said in a deep voice, "We will set off the day after tomorrow. I still need something. Maybe you can help me get it?" The Oriental dancer didn't seem to expect Soren to agree so quickly, but in the end she smiled and nodded gently. She turned her eyes and said, "No problem. The things you want will be delivered tomorrow." Things seemed to be settled like this. Soren finally decided to set off the day after tomorrow, and in the group of cannon fodder, there was an additional Oriental dancer above high grade, as well as some people she brought with her. Although Soren could not know everything about the situation in the underground ruins, after all, there was a cloak that was like a divine artifact for rogues, so he remembered the general situation and the distribution of areas inside more clearly. In this case, he had the geographical advantage. Even if there was an accident, he had more than a 50% chance. So, on the morning of the third day, this group of adventurers set off on the road to the ancient ruins with nearly 100 people and materials close to a caravan. Before everything began, Soren must find the right excavation site and open a passage into the ancient ruins. Chapter 400. The group of people slowly moved forward in the yellow sand. The closer they got to the desert of death, the stronger the sandstorm became. Sometimes there would even be terrible sandstorms. Even a powerful professional like Soren could be buried in the sand after a sandstorm. Energy radiation not only changed the environment, but also the abnormal climate of the desert. Although the tree shepherds had worked hard for hundreds of years to build some oases and plant defenses in the desert. But in the end, they were easily destroyed by the terrible sandstorms. Sometimes, the wind from the desert of death was like a storm, and it could directly bury a river. Of course. But that was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was the desert tornado. This was the real disaster or even a nightmare. The gigantic tornado engulfed everything in its vicinity. Any caravan that encountered it would not be able to escape. Gigantic tornadoes were formed due to the mutation of energy radiation. When the intensity of the tornado exceeded level 5, it could cause energy chaos in the nearby area. This was the so-called dead magic area and magic chaos area. In this area, the wizard's spells were very likely to be ineffective, and in that case there was no place to escape. Soren had seen a giant tornado with a range of more than 15 kilometers, from the yellow sand below to the clouds in the sky. It was as if the whole world was about to be sucked in. Note: giant tornadoes can be encountered about once every 3 years. He still remembered the first time he came here with other teams. At that time, they realized that the terrible natural climate was sometimes more troublesome than the powerful monsters. The group moved forward very slowly. This was because they had prepared more than 30 camels, and there were also a lot of supplies on them. Although there were only 5 adventurers in the team, the amount of supplies they needed was quite large. When Soren first came to the desert to explore the ruins, the whole team was a little dumbfounded when they arrived at the place. Because there was no way in, the poor dwarven juggernaut was forced to dig for 2 whole days because of their high stamina. Only then did they open a passage into the ruins, but after they met a sealed wall, everyone had to go back and prepare more tools. Later, when exploring the ancient ruins, the adventurers would bring a team of 30 to 40 people. Just like that, the group advanced for 3 days. Along the way, Soren also gained a better understanding of the others. For example, the dwarven juggernaut was a chatterbox. Of course, under the circumstances where he didn't drink, he was still relatively quiet. Dwarves didn't have much resistance to good wine. Along the way, while others drank water, this guy had been drinking. If it wasn't for his amazing physique, this fellow would have been drunk to death. The name of the dwarven juggernaut was Sauron Tat Anden. He was a very young dwarf, only 46 years old this year. He had a thick beard and a strong body. He had the dwarven bloodline of Helm's Deep, and his body could be slightly petrified as if he had been blessed with stone skin. Bloodline of the Hill Dwarves. The name of the Eastern Ronin was Ing Zong. He was an advanced Ronin from the Eastern Sea region. There were many islands there and many Ronins were advanced pirates. This was a very quiet guy. He had been polishing his sword all along the way. He should be quite strong, but what surprised Soren was that he was using his left hand. A left-handed Ronin swordsman. As for the other desert warrior, he was a more famous adventurer in the local area. His name was Muhammad Nord. A desert warrior with a profession level of about 15, an advanced profession of the warrior. Like Soren, he was good at using 2 weapons to fight. His weapon was similar to a Persian scimitar. His dress was also a bit similar to that of the Persians. Note: the desert warrior's advanced profession is similar to that of the northern warrior. It belongs to a regional advanced profession and has received special regional combat training. As for the last oriental dancer, she should be the only profession that Soren didn't know the depth of. He could only determine that her profession level was above 16, proficient in illusion, and also mastered mirror image. In the afternoon of the 3rd day, Soren and others finally arrived at their destination. There was a landmark building here which was a broken obelisk. They didn't know what it was used for. But in the underground ruins buried in the desert, many large ruins had such obelisks. Here we are. Soren looked up at the sky and said in a deep voice, "It's here. Let the workers get ready to work." He quickly came to the bottom of the obelisk, and then began to move in the direction of the sun. Soren counted his steps and walked about 150 meters, and then about 50 meters to the north. Finally he squatted down, reached out and touched the yellow sand on the ground and said in a deep voice, "Start digging from here. Dig a passage about 3 meters in diameter." There were many dangerous places under the ancient ruins. Digging in the wrong place could lead to accidents. Moreover, the whole city was buried in yellow sand. When the disaster happened, almost no residents in the city survived. Under such circumstances, the possibility of undead creatures appearing in the city was very high. Nearly 100 workers began to get busy. Digging a passage with a diameter of 3 meters was not so easy. Because this was a desert area, there was sand above and there might be quicksand below. It was very difficult to dig a passage in the sand. It needed to be cleaned up nearby and a lot of tools were used. Nearly 100 people seemed to be a lot, but when they really started to work it wasn't very fast. They had to dig a passage with a shovel and they could only do it slowly. The sky gradually darkened. Soren supervised the workers' work, and then got up and walked around to see if there was anything unusual. Ah! At this moment, there was a shrill scream from the construction site, and then all the professionals present rushed over. Soren also rushed over. Before he got close, he saw a worker twitching on the ground, foaming at the mouth and soon stopped breathing. He pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword and said in a deep voice, "What's the matter?" The one who answered Soren was the Eastern Ronin. There was a yellow scorpion on the blade of his sword, and he said in a deep voice, "It's a sand scorpion. It's very poisonous." They had just started work and a person had died. This was a considerable blow to the enthusiasm of the workers. Many people were a little timid when they worked. Soren had no choice but to let Dongfang Ronin supervise from the side and deal with the sand scorpions that might appear at the same time. This guy's sword speed was very fast. Just now, it was he who killed 3 sand scorpions in an instant. Night fell. A group of people set up tents near the construction site. The workers gathered together to sleep, while the professionals took turns to keep watch. The wind was very strong at night. But fortunately it only lasted for a while. It was quiet all around and occasionally a slight rustling sound could be heard. Soren sat by the campfire and meditated. From time to time he turned his head to look at the hole that had been dug, because there were more than just a few poisonous scorpions below. Light footsteps came from behind him, and then he saw the Oriental dancer sitting in front of him in a wide cloak. "What are you worried about?" The Oriental dancer met Soren's gaze and said with a meaningful expression, "Since you came here, you seem to be a little worried." Chapter 401. Soren did not answer the question of the Oriental dancer. He looked up at the sky and his eyes seemed to pass through the sky and see some fragments of the future. The stars in the night sky were already very dim. As they entered the latter part of April, some of the stars became very inconspicuous. No matter how one looked at it, the moon was a bit gray as if it was covered with a layer of haze. There were still 8 months before the end of this year. These should be the most stable 8 months for Soren. When the spring of next year came, he was afraid that he would not be so relaxed and stable. The Oriental dancer looked up at the sky, and she seemed to be a little absent-minded. She murmured, "Have you heard of the legend of the East?" "What legend?" Soren stirred the fire and said in a deep voice. The Oriental dancer stood up and looked at the moon. Then he said in a low voice, "When all the stars in the sky become dim, a demon star will streak across the sky. At that time there will be a huge disaster. It is said that there are rumors in many places, and the monks seem to be secretly preparing to deal with something. There is news in the Eastern Kingdom that many ascetic monks have come out, including the ascetic monks of the Prajna sect. The actions of the monks make many people feel uneasy. After completing this task I will return to the Eastern Kingdom. Her Excellency Empress asked us to withdraw from the Desert of Death before the second half of the year, although I don't know what will happen." The Eastern Empress. This woman's professional level was above level 30. She was a legend among legends. Soren was not surprised that she could detect the signs of the Avatar crisis in advance. The Desert of Death was the first to bear the brunt of the Avatar crisis. There were too many evil things sealed here, but there was no monastery to suppress them. It was easy to become a chaotic place of killing. "It's good to leave here." Soren turned and glanced at the woman behind him. The Oriental dancer had a charm that was different from other women. This exotic style made it easy for them to gain the favor of others. But it did not include Soren because the woman in front of him was very likely to want to get closer to him. If one had to use a kind of person to describe the Oriental dancer, they were like the Ingwe faction of the Devil sect. The Oriental Empress was proficient in charming techniques, and the lethality of her dance was definitely not much weaker than the demonic dance. Moreover, they were inextricably linked to the brothels of the Eastern Kingdom. On the surface, many Oriental dancers were the top hostesses of brothels, but secretly they were ruthless assassins. Soren stood up and looked at the woman in front of him. "Time's up," he said in a deep voice. "It's time for someone else to keep watch. You'd better rest early today. We can enter the underground tomorrow." The second night watchman was the Oriental Ronin. He sat by the fire with his sword in his arms. He glanced at the Oriental dancer, but his face showed a lack of interest. After a while, he pierced a scorpion with his sword and roasted it over the fire. Surprisingly, he drank some wine. The night passed quickly. The next day the laborers were urged to work again. Their progress was much faster in the morning. They dug up the broken walls of some buildings. However, something unexpected happened once again. After digging a hole in the wall, a large number of sacred beetles suddenly rushed out. The black mass of sacred beetles crazily rushed out and submerged the 3 workers who were closest to them. Not to mention these ordinary people, even the other professions present, especially the Oriental dancer, could not help but turn pale after seeing the dense sacred beetles. Desert sacred beetles. They were like marching ants in the outer islands, a creature that could drown even high-grade professions. Fire. Soren had been prepared for this for a long time. With his order, someone poured kerosene on the side of the passage, and then the fire spread to the passage. It burned for more than 10 minutes before the sacred beetles were driven to other places. There were a lot of burned sacred beetles at the entrance of the passage. There were probably thousands of them. Many ancient ruins in the desert had this kind of creature. If one did not prepare in advance, seeing them would make one's scalp tingle. 2 dead and 1 injured. The casualties were still within Soren's expectations, although they had just dug to the edge of the underground ruins. "Get ready to go in." Soren looked up at the sky and said in a deep voice, "Hold the torch. Everyone else, get ready. There should be an ancient ruin square below here. There are some unclean things inside. We have to clean them up first before we can continue to dig the passage. Ordinary people would die if they went down." Soren had to clean up some monsters inside before they could go in and continue to dig. I've been waiting impatiently for a long time. The dwarven juggernaut knocked on his shield, jumped up from the sand dune and said excitedly, "Is there treasure below? Didn't you say that you know the situation inside very well? There should be some good things near the square, right?" Treasure. Except for Soren and the Oriental dancer, the rest of the people present came for wealth. Soren glanced at him and nodded. There should be some. According to the distribution of buildings during the Arcane Empire, we should be able to find a lot of arcane gold coins nearby. The value of this gold coin is very high, and the exchange ratio with Kindler is about 1:10. Arcane gold. Simply put, it was gold refined by alchemy. The stability of gold was very strong, and the gold coin manufacturing technology of the Arcane Empire was at least 2 eras ahead of the current era. Is it so valuable? The dwarven juggernaut was a little excited. Doesn't that mean that if we find 100 of them, we can exchange them for 1,000 Kindler? Hearing his words, the expressions of the Oriental Ronin and the Desert Warrior changed slightly. It was normal to find thousands of ancient gold coins in an underground ruin exploration, which meant that there were tens of thousands of Kindler's income, not counting other treasures. Don't be happy too early. Soren frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "There may be undamaged golem guards below. Our task is still to clean up the square first and then explore other areas." The dwarven juggernaut patted his chest and said seriously, "I know. It's not the first time I've come out to explore ruins. Don't worry, I won't mess around." Rumble. There was a slight sound of collapse in the passage as if a wall had been pushed down. Soren glanced down and immediately said, "Prepare the rope. We've dug an entrance that looks more than 30 meters deep. Torches, hook locks, pulleys." Soren walked in the front as a rogue. Although he could easily go down with the help of levitation, he still slowly slid to the bottom with a rope. At present, no one knew that he was a part-time wizard, so it was better to keep it a secret for the time being. Soren's night vision was very strong. He glanced around, immediately lit the torch and said in a deep voice, "You can come down." The second one to come down was the dwarven juggernaut. He was the orthodox meat shield. His heavy armor was more than 60 pounds, and only the dwarven juggernaut could afford to wear it. Good strength, the highest constitution among the conventional races. Dwarves who don't advance can reach 19 points if they have good talent. The dwarven juggernaut is a top meat shield in all aspects except for his height disability, and these guys are born with good taunting ability. Bang. Because of his weight, the sound of his landing was not small. The sound echoed in the dead underground, and soon there seemed to be some slight movements coming from all sides. Never expect the juggernaut to move quietly. Soren listened for a while, and his face gradually became dignified. He said in a deep voice, "Come down quickly. Get ready to fight." The Desert Warrior and the Oriental Ronin were both agile melee professions. They soon landed and stood firm, while the Oriental Dancer landed quietly. Woo woo woo. Strange sounds came from all directions, making one's hair stand on end. Damn it. The dwarven juggernaut listened for a while and muttered, "It's really the undead." What the hell? A faint blue flame appeared. The breath of the undead appeared with the cold wind. There should be little ventilation in the closed underground ruins, so they knew at once that they had encountered the undead. Ghost fire. There seems to be a skeleton undead nearby. Soren frowned and looked around and said in a deep voice, "Get the holy water ready, you can smear it on your weapons. Everyone, don't be too scattered, no one knows what monsters are here." Woo woo woo. Translucent figures appeared, and these undead, who were buried together with the city, rushed towards them. Clang. Soren slashed his sword in an instant. The curved sword Icing Death had energy damage which could directly deal with these undead creatures. I hate the undead. The clumsy dwarven juggernaut had no way to deal with the ghosts. He could only turn his eyes and find an awakened skeleton undead, challenge rating 6. All the people present were high-grade professions. They were also the leaders of a town organization, so it was naturally easy to deal with these undead. The battle lasted only a few minutes. All the undead were dealt with. Soren put away his curved sword and began to light the torch. This was the first stop to explore the underground ruins. Because it sunk into the depths of the desert, many places were buried. The exploration must be done step by step from here. Although the light became abundant, everything in front of them was also displayed in front of them. This was a square with a large diameter, and in front of it was a broken obelisk. Half of the square was buried and the other half was the location where they dug. If Soren hadn't found the location, it would have been useless for them to dig here, unless they dug out all the soil and sand. There was a passage near the square which was the street of the city. It was very open, but many had been buried, and the collapse of the houses was quite serious. Only a few of the buildings in front of them were intact. These well-preserved places were not simple, and there were traces of arcane magic. This should be the location. Before Soren acted, he was still prepared to give them some benefits. After all, they were all high-grade professions, and it was difficult for them to really work hard if they didn't see the benefits. He still had a deep impression in his memory that there was a place nearby with a lot of loot. "Follow me." Soren looked up. It had been buried for thousands of years and it was much more solid, but he did not rule out the possibility of abnormal collapse. He did not want to be buried under the sand. The group of people moved forward very carefully. As they gradually approached a relatively intact building, some plants unexpectedly appeared in front of them. Mossy plants. There were mottled traces on the wall, and there were broken artificial crystals. This was the craftsmanship of the Arcane Empire. They used artificial crystals to transmit magic energy. Intruder found. Intruder found. Reserve energy activated. Magic-powered device activated. Level 1 defense system activated. A cold mechanical voice sounded. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from the wall in front of him, followed by heavy footsteps. A 3-meter-tall puppet golem made entirely of steel stepped out. Soren stepped back vigilantly, letting the dwarf warrior stand in front, and said in a deep voice, "It's a puppet golem from the Arcane Empire. Be careful. They may have the means of energy attack." As long as it was an underground ruin related to the Arcane Empire, it was easy to encounter these steel golems, because they completely replaced the city guards during the Arcane Empire. Target found. Magic-powered guard Type 1 received attack command. Click. The arm of the steel golem in front of them suddenly turned, and then a black cannon barrel stretched out. This was a rare golem craftsmanship in the current era. Soren just glanced at it and his face changed greatly, spread out quickly. Boom. Boom boom boom. 3 energy cannons hit where they were, directly blowing up pits in the ground. The power was not much different from that of mortars. Ba ba ba. The dwarf juggernaut spat out the soil in his mouth, roared, rushed over with his shield in front of him and shouted, "Tadinen hates puppet golems. Go to hell. Steel monster." The mountain dwarves also had brilliant alchemy, which was finally destroyed in the hands of the dwarf defender, construct golem, they created. Clang. With a harsh sound of metal collision, the dwarf warrior's axe hit the leg of the steel golem, and sparks came out directly. Attack the joint position. Soren's figure also moved and went around from the side. The Oriental Ronin also reacted quickly. He slid sideways and swung his sword at the leg joint of the golem. Activate the energy shield. Elemental fission shield activated. Insufficient energy. Elemental fission shield failed to activate. Magic-powered guard Type 1, switch to the melee form. Under the attack of Soren and others, the joint part of the steel golem began to operate like a transformer, and the black muzzle entered its body and transformed into a pale golden square shield and a giant sword forged with magical steel craftsmanship. At the same time, the key part of its leg that was hit began to gradually recover, and the metal seemed to come alive and gradually return to its original appearance. Memory metal? Soren's face changed in an instant, and then his expression became a little surprised. He murmured, "Is it a high-level construct golem?" Chapter 402. Memory Metal. As long as the advanced technology of the Arcane Empire was not completely damaged, it could gradually be restored to its original state. This was an alchemy process that was only used on the high-level golems of the Arcane Empire. The memory metal allowed these golems to have the ability to repair themselves, which would allow them to continue fighting for a long time. For example, what Soren saw in front of him was a wound on the leg of a high-level construct golem, but it quickly recovered to its original state. Memory metal had a great relationship with the weapons of the Githyankis in the astral realm. Many wizard organizations were secretly studying this metal to strengthen golems. Unfortunately, the progress he had made so far wasn't that great. Focus your attacks on one spot. Soren twisted his body to avoid the giant sword wielded by the high-level construct golem. At the same time, he backhanded his sword and slashed at the enemy's leg. The golem's strength was infinite, and only the dwarven juggernaut could withstand it. If the others were to face it head-on, they would either die or be injured. Fortunately, it had been buried in the underworld for too long, so the high-level construct golems didn't have much energy left. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't know what other terrifying attacks they had. A fully constructed golem of this level was sometimes similar to a simplified version of a transformer. Clang, clang. The sound of metal clashing against metal could be heard. The Arcane Empire's alloy steel craftsmanship was very strong. Soren felt like he was using a cold weapon to dismantle a tank. The strength of the alloy steel was almost at the level of aerospace craftsmanship. Soren had a sense of helplessness as he gnawed on a hard bone. The magic golems were highly resistant to spells and ignored most of the negative statuses. The only way to deal with them was to tear them apart. Who would have thought that I would encounter a situation that was jokingly referred to as tearing down a Gundam with my bare hands so soon? Soren slid 3 meters to the side. Then he switched from holding the sword with one hand to holding it with both hands. He activated sword form horizontal slash, and slashed at the high-level construct statue's knee. Perhaps their series of attacks finally had an effect, as the memory metal's recovery ability was damaged by the continuous attacks. The high-level construct golem's body shook, and then its movements suddenly became slow and awkward. Its leg rune had been destroyed. Good chance. Soren's face lit up and he said in a low voice, "Attack its other leg and stop it from moving." Gale cut. The enemy's movement speed was impaired, and the Oriental Ronin, who was a little restrained at first, suddenly became brave. Among all of them, he was the only one who was inclined to the warrior profession and did not wear heavy armor. Now that the enemy's movement was impaired, he was able to attack freely. The Oriental Ronin's left hand was like a gust of wind, and his technique was a bit like this sword-drawing technique. In an instant he slashed 3 times, all hitting the same position, and in an instant the other leg joint of the high-level construct golem was split open with obvious cracks. Is it the Storm Ronin's faction? Soren glanced at him and thought to himself, so, he's probably an Eastern Ranger who evolved into a Ronin? There were many special advanced professions in the Eastern countries. Soren's deepest impression was the Fist Master, that came from the Eastern world. In the Eastern world, there were many professionals who specialized in a certain skill, and they believed that this skill would eventually become compatible with the heavenly axiom, nature, and world. Boom. The heavy greatsword was smashed down by the high-level construct golem. The dwarven juggernaut, who had resisted it once, did not take it head-on again. After that, he used his short stature to avoid the attack. Let me do it. After Soren jumped out of the battle, he put away his curved sword and replaced it with a small dagger with a pale golden luster. He said to the desert warrior who was fighting, "Attract its attack, I'll cut off its leg." The curved sword was a legendary equipment, but its cutting ability was not as good as the dagger in Soren's hand, because this dagger was a weapon forged with a lot of fine gold. Among all the special metals, the hardness and cutting ability of fine gold were the most amazing. A real fine gold weapon could even be used to cut diamonds. This dagger was better than many legendary equipment when cutting metal. Sword form, spinning strike. With a burst of sparks, Soren rushed to the side of the high-level construct golem. At the same time, the dagger in his hand cut through the broken steel armor with a cold light. Crack. There was a clear sound of breaking. When Soren's figure rushed forward to avoid the waving shield, the high-level construct golem behind him suddenly shook, and then rumbled and fell to the ground. One of its legs had been severed. Rogues still have to rely on equipment to survive. Without a suitable weapon, many skills are useless. Soren put away the fine gold dagger and then took out the curved sword again. The dagger was too short, too small, and not easy to use. Even if he had trained in using the dagger, Soren still did not like this short and powerful weapon. Dang. Dang. The high-level construct golem with one leg cut off suddenly became a live target. Its incomplete movement speed was basically difficult to threaten the others present. However, another problem arose. It seemed to have activated its defensive mode and put the heavy shield in front of its body, which suddenly made people feel like they were facing a turtle shell. Losing a leg made it give up most of its attacks. The intelligent command input by the Arcane Empire actually let it know to switch to defensive mode in a disadvantageous situation. This time, everyone was a little dumbfounded. It was not that they could not kill it, but the opponent was obviously in a defensive counterattack posture. Unless they could deceive its counterattack, they were very likely to be included in the sweeping range of the giant sword after attacking. Damn it. Soren's face was a little ugly and he murmured, "This golem actually has the ability, attack through defense." The puppet golems of the current era did not have any abilities. Only the high-level golems of the Arcane Empire could be inputted with some special combat abilities by the great arcanists. It was definitely quite depressing to encounter such a high-level golem. What a tough bone to chew. The dwarven juggernaut took a step back with his battle axe and gasped slightly, "What do we do now? This damn thing stays in place and defends. Why don't we go around it?" "No." Soren shook his head and said, "It's safer to get rid of it. Attack through defense." A very disgusting defensive ability. It was equivalent to giving up on offense and focusing on defense. At the same time, under the situation of focusing on defense, it could carry out part of the defensive counterattack. If other people mastered this ability, it would be a little better. They could more or less break through the defense ability. But when this ability was mastered by a high-level puppet golem made completely of steel, the situation became very troublesome. "Cover me." Soren frowned and thought for a moment. Then the pale golden dagger appeared in his palm and he said in a deep voice, "Help me attract its attention. I'll find a chance to destroy its energy core." There was no energy. No matter how powerful a construct golem was, it was still a pile of scrap metal. Soren needed someone to cover for such a dangerous thing. Chapter 403. The others continued to harass the high-level construct golem. Soren, on the other hand, kept circling around it looking for a breakthrough point. The energy core was generally placed in the most heavily protected area. This kind of golem was unlikely to place the energy core in its head. The most likely place was its chest. Because no matter from which angle, the chest was the easiest place to protect. The high-level construct golem only needed to put a shield or a greatsword across its chest to block most of the attacks. Therefore, its energy core was likely to be inside the alloy steel armor on its chest. Attract its attack. Soren turned his eyes to the Oriental dancer next to him. She was the most agile and flexible one besides Soren. Against this kind of steel-shaped enemy, the Oriental dancer did not have much fighting power, but she was one of the few people who could deceive the high-level construct golem to fight back. Soren needed her to open a breakthrough point, otherwise the shield would be too uncomfortable. Hazy dance. Moonlight step. The Oriental dancer's reaction was very fast. Her tall figure suddenly jumped lightly like a dance, and her figure gradually became hazy. When she slid to the side of the high-level construct golem, she suddenly waved her dagger and stabbed it. Clang. Unsurprisingly, the high-level construct golem blocked the attack with a heavy shield. In the combined defense with attack mode, its defensive ability had increased by at least 3 levels. The greatsword swept down. The Oriental dancer's expression was not worried. With a light twist and a light tap of her toes, she dodged with a technique similar to Shuanpa. At this moment, Soren, who had been waiting for an opportunity, finally moved. His figure disappeared into the shadows. Evade sight. Soren's figure disappeared in place. The next moment, he appeared beside the high-level construct golem out of thin air, or it should be said that he appeared directly in the arms of the high-level construct golem. Time went back half a second. The high-level construct golem blocked the attack of the Oriental dancer with a heavy shield, and then waved its greatsword with a backhand sweep. At this moment, the shield in its hand was raised slightly, and at the same time, under the light of the nearby torch, the shield formed a shadow that was projected on its own body. And Soren's figure jumped out of this shadow. It was a crazy move. This was like walking on a tightrope. No, it should be said that he was dancing on the tip of a knife. Soren's silhouette appeared right next to the high-level construct golem. The golem's cold steel armor touched his arm. In this situation, as long as the high-level construct golem's reaction speed was slightly faster, it could instantly close its arms and trap Soren inside. The enormous strength was enough to strangle him to death. However, Soren was still one step ahead of him. After directly appearing beside the high-level construct golem with shadow jump, a pale golden cold light appeared in his palm, and then the fine gold dagger accurately pierced the chest of the high-level construct golem. Accompanied by a burst of crackling flames, the puppet golem in front of him trembled, and then its arms fell down powerlessly. Patter. Soren landed on the ground. His chest was a little undulating, and it seemed that he had consumed a lot of energy just now. This kind of risky move was more or less frightening, but it seemed that he had successfully hit the enemy's energy core. If he did not hit the enemy's vital parts, he would have to use shadow jump again to escape from the enemy's attack range. It's finally dead? The dwarven juggernaut gasped and sat on the ground, muttering, "This thing is probably more powerful than the dwarven defender." No wonder the arcane empire was destroyed. No one paid attention to his words. After Soren rested for a moment, he slowly stood up and said, "There should be some loot inside. You guys go and collect it." Hearing Soren's words, the dwarven juggernaut quickly got up and walked inside quickly. "Let's go. Let's see what's good inside." The others looked at each other and could not help but follow. As normal adventurers, they were more concerned about how much they could get. Soren stood still. He was now the pirate king who ruled the 3 seas, and his value was comparable to the ruler of a small kingdom. The only thing that really attracted him here was the cloak against detection, which was undoubtedly a divine artifact for rogues. The other one who stood still was the Oriental dancer. She seemed to be very interested in the high-level construct golem in front of her and whispered, "Is this the craftsmanship of the arcane empire? It's really amazing wisdom." Soren ignored her. He reached out and took out some tools, and then began to disassemble the high-level construct golem in front of him. Although Soren was not an orthodox wizard and did not know much about alchemy, many of the parts inside were at the level of the arcane empire's craftsmanship. It would definitely be useful for Gloria's research. The challenge level of this thing was probably close to level 20. They could deal with it so easily, and more importantly, it was because the enemy's energy was insufficient. The elemental fishing shield sounded like a very high-end thing. Dang dang dang. Soren quickly disassembled the high-level construct golem into parts. Some things that looked like a construct body were all put in by him, and then he collected some samples of the memory metal. The golem craftsmanship of the arcane empire was very exquisite. The parts inside were more than 10 times more complicated than the current golem craftsmanship. It made people feel like they were disassembling a robot. Soren found the energy core in the chest of the golem that he had destroyed, and something similar to a crystal block in its brain. This should be its intelligence system, right? Soren held the purple crystal block in his hand and said with a dignified expression, "It can actually inject special abilities into the puppet golem. How did the spellcasters of the arcane empire do it?" It was very high-end stuff. It could even be said to be at the level of artificial intelligence. Soren became more and more curious about the craftsmanship of the arcane empire. He didn't know how to study this thing at all. So Soren directly put it away and planned to bring it back to Gloria to see if she could find something from it. At the very least, it could help her upgrade her steel golem. If the puppet golem could be injected with special abilities, then its growth would be quite terrifying. So, the dwarven juggernaut and the other 2 people came out of the front room. They brought out a lot of good things and some complete light purple crystals. It was not clear whether they were artificial or natural crystals. Looking at their expressions, they should be satisfied with the benefits they obtained. This was good. Soren wanted to satisfy them so that these people would really work hard. Chapter 404. The spoils of war made the others more active in their actions. After disassembling the body of the high-level construct golem, Soren began to survey the nearby terrain. Many places had collapsed and buried. The only passage pointed to the north, which was not where Soren wanted to go. The scope of the underground ruins was very large. After all, this was a sunken city, but the places that could be explored were limited, unless a large number of people were arranged to dig out the city. Such a project was difficult even in the 21st century, so the exploration of the ruins was mainly concentrated in the core area. Let the workers come down. Soren surveyed the nearby terrain, then came to a thick wall and said in a deep voice, "You should be able to enter the interior if you break through here. Let them come down with tools and dig bit by bit. You can't blow it up with gunpowder." The light in the square was already very strong. The torches illuminated this area, and the monsters were basically cleaned up by them. The Oriental dancer quickly went up and asked people to come down. After a while, dozens of workers timidly landed along the rope. They glanced at the surrounding environment, and the expressions on their faces were still very scared. But at this time it was no longer up to them. Under the orders of the professionals, these workers began to dig the side walls. The rhythmic knocking echoed in the underground ruins, as if the vibration had disturbed something. Suddenly, there was a slight tremor in the depths of the underground ruins, and some kind of aura that penetrated the soul. Baylor, monster level 27. The Baylor, sealed in the deepest part of the underground ruins, felt the vibration above, but it could not leave the range of the seal at all. The only people present who knew what was below were Soren and the Oriental dancer, but they were wise enough not to speak, because it was better not to let others know about this kind of existence. The workers stopped in fear under the slight movement, but were soon called to work quickly again. Soren could not stay here for too long. There seems to be something here. The bearded dwarf warrior murmured. The Oriental Ronin glanced at him and said in a deep voice, "There must be something under this kind of place. We'd better move faster." It took him more than an hour to do so. They finally opened up a passageway. Unlike the plaza, the space inside was very narrow. Broken buildings supported the gaps inside, and many places only allowed one person to pass through at a time. Of course, Soren was the one leading the way. His main goal was to get the cloak of proof against detection, so he was heading straight for the general area. This legendary equipment was stored in a special room. Its previous owner should have been a powerful professional. Now, there was a monster that was very difficult to deal with. This monster had once wiped out the adventurers who first explored this place. Later on, only then did the adventurers figure out a way to deal with it. Since Soren was here, he naturally knew how to kill it, but he might have to pay a small price. The rugged passage gradually widened. This meant that Soren had entered another area. This should be the residential area of the city's nobles. Even though it was dilapidated, he could still see that the buildings here were exquisite, and there were many marble pillars nearby. The most conspicuous thing in this area was a tall house. It was one of the few buildings that was well preserved. From the side he could see 3 steel golems. Their surface was heavily rusted. They should be low-level puppet golems. Because they lost their power source, they were completely scrapped. Be careful. Soren looked around and said in a low voice, "There seems to be an undead aura here." Hearing his words, the rest of the people present became alert. There were indeed undead here. But it was not an ordinary undead. Soren knew what was here before he came. Ancient mummy, challenge rating 18. Mummy. It was a very common monster among undead creatures. Some were man-made mummies, while some were naturally formed due to certain reasons. The desert was the most likely place for mummies to appear. These undead creatures were not difficult to deal with. A normal adventurer team could easily kill them. However, if an undead creature had the word ancient above its head, it would be quite difficult to deal with it. Ancient mummy, high undead, grade 5. Challenge rating 18, personal level 22, has spell-like ability. Highest and lowest attributes 25, lowest attributes 15, total attribute points 100 to 115. Special abilities, high undead characteristics, negative energy erosion, spell-like ability, immunity to ordinary weapons. Challenge difficulty, B+. The first group of adventurers to explore this place was the ancient mummy. It was a powerful undead creature that was created due to a special geographical environment. Soren looked around carefully. He knew that there was an ancient mummy here, but he didn't know where it was hiding. The group spread out and formed a defensive formation. They approached the building in front of them little by little. They didn't know where it was connected to the outside. There was a slight wind here and there was a faint chill. Whoosh! A strange figure passed through the darkness in front. Soren's spirit suddenly tensed up. He clenched his curved sword icing death and said in a low voice, "There is a monster nearby." There was a faint light. He didn't know if the curved sword icing death sensed something, or some kind of aura stimulated it. The legendary curved sword's body seemed to have encountered ice and emitted a faint light. This was the weapon's warning. Since the legendary curved sword icing death woke up, it seemed to have some special uses. Extinguishing flames. It emitted a dazzling silver light after coming into contact with sub-zero temperatures. And when there were evil creatures nearby, it gave an early warning. Be careful. The others could not help but hold their weapons nervously. Many of them glanced at Soren's curved sword, and some people's eyes flashed with greed for a moment. After all, the number of legendary weapons was quite rare. Soren's curved sword was not activated. Once it was activated, it would immediately let others know that it was a legendary weapon. Whoosh! The strange sound of the wind appeared again. A shadow flashed in the darkness. The ancient mummy was different from other undead. His speed was actually quite fast. When the undead reached its level, it was already a legendary monster and was no longer restricted by the mummified undead. It was even immune to the attacks of ordinary weapons. Fortunately, none of the professions present had white equipment. It's a mummy? The Oriental dancer reached out and picked up something from the ground. Her face changed slightly and said, "This fell from it." A piece of wrinkled dry cloth. She did not know how long it had been kept. There was a very unpleasant smell on it. It should be a high-grade mummy. The desert warrior knew a lot about mummies. He had probably encountered some before. He immediately said in a deep voice, "It has such speed. I'm afraid it's not so easy to deal with." The mummy was not in a hurry to attack. It seemed that its wisdom was good. It actually knew that the adventure team in front of it was not so easy to deal with. Soren's eyes turned and he immediately said in a deep voice, "You stay where you are and be on guard. I'll lure it out. Evade sight." His figure gradually disappeared into the darkness, but he was not looking for traces of the ancient mummy. Instead, he quietly sneaked toward the building in front. That was where the legendary equipment, Cloak Against Detection, was located. Soren came here for this piece of equipment, which was undoubtedly a god-level equipment for rogues. Now that he had found the place, it was naturally the most important thing to get it in his hands first. Hearing Soren's words, the others immediately formed a defensive formation. And he himself went over little by little, and then quietly sneaked into the room through the broken window. He was very clear about the memory of this place. There was a dark room in the room and the Cloak Against Detection was stored in the box. However, there was a magic trap on the box. Forcibly opening it would trigger a disintegrate. There was no other way. This was a relic from the Arcane Empire. The level of the traps on it was very high. Even when Soren was at his peak, it was not easy to remove them. But it was not completely impossible. Knowing what kind of trap it was much easier to crack it. Crick. A slight noise came out. Soren quietly entered the dark room, and a lot of things suddenly appeared in front of him. There was only a piece of powder left on the bookshelf, but other well-preserved things were basically extraordinary items. Including some alchemy equipment, some unknown potions, a dark blue robe, and a staff of special texture, etc. The most eye-catching thing was undoubtedly the box in the corner. This was the most valuable thing in the vicinity, and it was also the only legendary equipment. The box had a special enchantment process. Even after thousands of years, it was still intact. Silver-white metal. There were strange patterns on the surface, which were engraved magic patterns. Any forcible destruction of the box would activate the magic trap on it. This was a treasure box that was difficult to open with brute force. The adventure team that found it in the past had no way to remove the magic trap, so they could only let the warriors directly break it open. In the end, the warrior was directly disintegrated. Disintegrate, level 6 spell. Disintegrate, transmutation. After casting this spell, a green light will be shot at the target, causing a maximum of 240 magic damage. It can directly disintegrate inanimate matter and can affect the effect of the force field. Any enemy hit by disintegrate must go through a compulsory test of immunity. If they fail to pass the test of immunity, they may be disintegrated. If they pass, some of the damage will be reduced. The level of this magic trap was extremely high. The warrior who opened it was a high-grade warrior, about a profession level 16 defensive warrior. As a result, he was instantly disintegrated along with his equipment. Even now, Soren did not have much confidence in resisting it. However, disintegrate had a flaw, which was that it would only work on the first target it hit. Soren basically had no way to remove this magic trap unless his dispel trap skill was as high as 200 points. So the only way to open this box was to use disintegrate, or use a crossplane method to avoid this attack. He turned around in a circle. Then Soren quietly moved the bookshelf a little, just enough to cover him in the shadow, and then took an alchemy crystal bottle in his hand. 1, 2, 3. Soren took a deep breath, swung his curved sword, and smashed it directly on the box in front of him. Clang. With a muffled sound, Soren suddenly let go of the crystal bottle in his hand, and at the same time, his figure became blurred in the shadow. The next moment he appeared 1 meter away. Shadow leap. A green light appeared, and in the blink of an eye, it hit the place where Soren was originally, and then the crystal bottle that he let go of was directly disintegrated, disappearing without a trace like melting snow. It's broken. There was a strange sound of wind outside, and the movement here attracted the wandering ancient mummies outside. Soren did not think much and directly smashed the box in front of him. Without looking at the other items, he directly picked up a black cloak and put it on himself. Cloak of Proof Against Detection. He was finally one step ahead. He got this equipment that was undoubtedly a godly item for rogues. Item type, Cloak of Proof Against Detection. Item grade. Grade 3 legendary item. Item description. This is a legendary cloak. Anyone who wears it will not be discovered by any spells after entering the state of stealth. It is immune to all detection spells, unless it is a creature with the natural ability to see through invisibility. Otherwise, even the incarnation of the gods would not be able to discover the person wearing it through detection spells. However, it is not omnipotent. Although this legendary cloak can make people immune to detection spells, there is no way to hide other movements in the state of stealth. Requirements: none. Equipment effect 1, sneak plus 30. Equipment effect 2, force field of proof against detection, immune to any detection spells. No enemy can use spells to break the state of stealth of the person wearing this legendary equipment. Soren's figure disappeared into the shadows. This legendary equipment did not have many additional abilities. In addition to the force field of proof against detection, it only added an additional 30 points of sneak. However, this was already very useful for Soren. After putting on this cloak, he went into stealth again without the slightest trace, as if he had completely integrated into the darkness. Gotcha. A slight noise was heard. A shadow gradually approached from the outside, and the figure of the ancient mummy appeared outside the dark room. However, it did not find any trace of Soren. Instead, it looked around blankly. The undead had a certain ability to detect invisibility. However, after putting on the cloak of proof against detection, only creatures born with true sight could discover Soren's trace. Chapter 405. The required database has been filled up. Well, thank you everyone. There are 2 updates today. Rogues were actually a profession that could be easily cheated. Although rogues had all kinds of abnormal means, and warriors had all kinds of resistance and endurance, they were naturally proficient in a variety of skills and had mastered the most basic skills. Rogues did not lack the level of cheat-like achievements. For example, killing monsters of more than 10 monster levels, sneaking alone into a dungeon with a challenge rating of 12 or above to steal treasures, or using a combination of high agility and items to play a little shocking acrobatics, and forcibly dragging a group of professions to death. This kind of thing was not rare. Rogues were a profession system that made it easy for people to play their own strengths. They could sneak, attack, assassinate, dig holes, pick locks, steal, alchemy, poison, have good knowledge, perform well, have good hearing, and are easy to get up in the wild. In the comprehensive basic skills, no profession was more versatile than rogues. Rogues had the most basic skills. So after bypassing the ancient mummy and getting what he wanted, Soren had a new idea in his mind. He was ready to kill this legendary ancient mummy because the slaughter EXP it gave would not be much less than an adult white dragon. Soren was less than 200,000 slaughter EXP away from entering the legendary realm. With the anti-detection cloak, even if he encountered a powerful enemy, as long as he did not have true sight, no one could stop him. The ancient mummy was not easy to deal with. There were 2 main headaches. The first was that as a high undead, it was quite resistant and belonged to the undead species at the meat shield level. The second was that it was born with a spell-like ability called Ghoul Touch. In the case of ordinary attacks, it could launch negative energy erosion, making people with insufficient immunity to directly freeze in place, and it was possible to steal some of their attributes through negative energy erosion. Ghoul Touch, level 2 spell. After hitting the target, a mandatory test of fortitude will be triggered, and the target that cannot pass will enter a state of paralysis. When activated, it will produce a stench, making nearby enemies feel nauseous and slightly affected. The difficulty of Ghoul Touch is affected by the spellcaster's casting level or the level of the creature. Vampiric Touch, Ghoul Touch. These 2 spells were not high-level spells, but they were very useful. The most disgusting thing about the ancient mummy was that its normal attacks would automatically carry the Ghoul Touch effect. Soren wasn't afraid of this spell. After all, his physique was very high and his toughness was comparable to many warriors. Among the people he brought here today, except for the Oriental dancer, whose toughness was relatively low, the others had a high chance of passing. Swoosh. Soren did not approach the primordial mummy. He took out his elven war bow and shot an arrow at it. Hoo hoo hoo. A strange sound came. After being attacked, the ancient mummy found Soren's position in an instant, and then rushed over at an amazing speed. Prepare for battle. Soren put away the elven war bow, and the master battlemaster gloves were instantly switched to curved sword icing death. As his figure rushed out of the shadows, a monster wrapped in bandages also appeared behind him. The ancient mummy was different from other mummies. The bandages on its body had almost been integrated into its body. The dry skin and the bandages were stuck together, and the whole body seemed to have an extra layer of skin. A stench filled the air. The Oriental dancer wrinkled her nose involuntarily, but the others were not affected. It's an ancient mummy? The desert warrior had a lot of knowledge about mummies. When he saw the monster behind him, his face immediately changed and he said, "Be careful not to touch it. Its attack can paralyze people." After all, he was still a little slow. Seeing the ancient mummy chasing after Soren as a qualified meat shield warrior, the dwarven juggernaut directly raised his shield and rushed over. Shield charge. Bang. The primordial mummy's figure was blocked by the dwarf warrior. The dwarf warrior was like a wall, forcing the primordial mummy to take a step back. Shield bash. The two sides collided in an instant. The moment the dwarven juggernaut came into contact with the ancient mummy, he trembled in the blink of an eye as if he was shivering, but he quickly recovered. He swung his heavy battle axe and smashed it down, roaring, "Damn undead! What the hell is this?" Immunity passed. Among all the people present, the dwarven juggernaut was undoubtedly the strongest. Seeing this scene, the desert warrior could not help but breathe a sigh of relief, then he waved his curved sword and joined the battle. Soren had been paying attention to the movement behind him. After finding that the dwarven juggernaut could resist the immunity test, he could not help but turn around and join the battle group. As long as the meat shield was not afraid of the effect of ghoul touch, it would be much easier to kill the ancient mummy. Shadow strike. Sword form, beheading. Soren jumped up from the left and instantly slashed the head of the ancient mummy with his sword. The enemy's body was extremely tough. It felt like he was chopping on dry iron wood. At the same time, at the moment of contact with the other side, there seemed to be a piercing chill. This was the negative energy field of the ancient mummy. When cut. The main force responsible for the output was still Soren and the Oriental Ronin. The role of the desert warrior was still the second meat shield. If the dwarven juggernaut could not withstand the immunity and was paralyzed, then he would temporarily act as the first meat shield. The only one who did not dare to get too close was the Oriental dancer. She did not know if it was for psychological reasons or her fortitude was too low, but when she was slightly touched by the ancient mummy, the woman's face was a little pale. After only hitting the enemy once, the Oriental dancer turned to harassment and attack. It seemed that she did not dare to get too close. But it was her move that made the ancient mummy, who had a certain amount of wisdom, list her as the first target because she looked like the easiest one to break through of all people. Touch of the undead. The ancient mummy suddenly gave up its defense under Soren's storm-like attacks. Its whole body shrank suddenly, and then the bandages on its body suddenly flew out like a poisonous snake. In an instant. Everyone had no time to dodge. Whether it was Soren or the Oriental Ronin, they were all blocked by the flying bandages. A row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes in an instant. Attacked by the ancient mummy. You've been attacked by the spell-like ability, Touch of the Undead, of the ancient mummy. You've been seriously eroded by negative energy. Test of fortitude failed. You've received 42 points of negative energy erosion damage. You've been temporarily absorbed 2 points of strength and 2 points of constitution. Damn it. It was a spell-like ability that absorbed attributes. The 4 melee professions present were all hit. Each of them lost 4 points of attributes, and their combat power suddenly decreased by a lot. However, the ancient mummy did not continue to attack them. Instead, it turned its eyes to the wandering Oriental dancer. In an instant, it rushed over, and the bandages on its body wrapped around her like a whip. Hazy dance. The Oriental dancer's face was pale, her body turned into 3 phantoms, and she retreated frantically at the same time. But it was a step too late. All the phantoms she turned into were hit by the bandages, and then her whole person seemed to be frozen in place. Sure enough, her fortitude could not be immune to the effect of Touch of the Undead. A trace of despair emerged. Seeing the ancient mummy rushing over, the Oriental dancer, who was completely stiff and had lost the ability to move, couldn't even close her eyes. Legendary monsters always had the ability to crush enemies below the legendary level. The shadow of death came. Just when it was too late for others to rescue her, and they thought that the Oriental dancer would die in the hands of the ancient mummy, Soren's figure suddenly disappeared. Evade sight. Shadow jump. At this time there was no way to hide her strength. Although Soren and she were using each other, he did not want her to die like this. Bang. At the moment when the Oriental dancer was desperate, Soren's figure suddenly appeared from behind her shadow, and then directly knocked her body away. He gritted his teeth and took an attack from the ancient mummy. Stone skin. The cold and biting negative energy emerged with a stench. Soren, whose attributes had been reduced by a full 4 points, could not resist the fortitude immunity in an instant, and his whole person stood stiffly in place. Bang bang bang. A series of attacks fell on him like a storm. It would obviously take some time for others to rescue her. In this case, Soren's only way to save his life was to rely on stone skin to resist. With just 2 attacks, the stone skin gradually collapsed. Every time the ancient mummy touched him, Soren would be affected by negative energy. Any of its attacks would have an additional 10 points of negative energy erosion damage. Even with Soren's more than 200 HP, he was suddenly put into a seriously injured state. After all, they were not long-term teammates. The speed of the other's rescue was obviously half a beat slower, especially the Oriental dancer who was knocked away by Soren. She didn't seem to think that Soren would save her in this situation, and she was stunned for a second. This stupid woman. Soren could not help but have a trace of violence in his heart. In the case of being paralyzed by ghoul touch, the possibility of these teammates in front of him saving him was less than 30%. The paralysis effect would not disappear soon. If he did not use his trump card, it was very likely that he would die in the hands of the ancient mummy. Finally, Soren decided not to hide his strength anymore. His eyes were instantly bloodshot, and his originally stiff body let out a crackling sound. A violent aura appeared on his body, and at the same time the paralysis effect of the ghoul touch was forcibly removed. Slaughter form. Sure enough, he couldn't be too soft-hearted. He actually forced himself to become a slaughter. Chapter 406. Slaughter, Death, Destruction. A violent aura emerged from Soren's body. Since the cost of transforming into the slaughter form became higher and higher, Soren rarely activated this ability. But he didn't expect that he didn't use this ability in many fights on the North Coast. Today, in order to save a woman, he had to activate the slaughter form again to protect himself. Because the ancient mummy was a legendary monster, Soren didn't have the confidence to resist the effect of the ghoul touch until the end. Sure enough, he had to pay a price for not being hard-hearted enough. An invisible energy field burst out. When Soren transformed into the slaughter form, some of his abilities were also automatically activated. Fear Gaze, Divinity. Death Walker, Legendary. Slaughter and death were always inseparable. When Soren transformed into the slaughter form, a substantial domain power also burst out. The Oriental dancer, who was grateful to Soren for saving her, turned pale under Soren's aura. Even her delicate body trembled slightly. Her pale face seemed to have seen something terrible. A row of data appeared, activated the slaughter form. Transformation completed. Divinity activated. Immune to negative energy erosion effect. Undead touch, negative status removed. Strength +6, agility +2, physique +2, wisdom +2, combat ability transformed to a warrior of the same level, resistance to any abnormal status increased by 10 points. Slaughter will activated. Immune to mind control spells. Slaughter Thirst activated. You are under the negative status of Slaughter Thirst. Unable to satisfy the Slaughter Thirst, you will enter a state of madness. Soren's pupils turned into a blood-red color. Facing the attack of the primordial mummy, Kieran suddenly raised his palm. Bang! Soren caught the attack of the ancient mummy with his bare hands. A shockwave of the collision of forces appeared. Soren stood still, but the ancient mummy's wrist was slightly bent. How terrifying was this power? Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them. Especially the Oriental dancer, who had fought with Soren before. Her face was full of disbelief at this moment. Soren's strength was only 19 points when he didn't use any spells. But if he transformed into the slaughter form, then his strength could reach a terrifying 25 points. This strength could almost crush many legendary-level warriors. As a warrior with 15 points of strength, all of his energy was focused on training his strength. He would only have 25 points of strength after entering the realm of legends. However, as the price of this unorthodox training, his vitality, agility, and so on would be greatly weakened. Soren's expression and expression. The ancient mummy's arms armed Soren's hand, ants violently. He lifted his foot and performed a beautiful shoulder throw. Along with the trembling of the ground, the ancient mummy was directly smashed into the ground by his brute force, and a human-shaped pit was forcibly smashed out. Clang! The legendary curved sword, Icing Death, flashed with a strange silver light. Soren waved his curved sword and slashed down. In an instant, a cold light shrouded the ancient mummy. Before it could even stand up, there were amazing sword marks on its body. Sword form, beheading. Soren changed from holding the sword with one hand to holding it with both hands. He jumped up and slashed towards the ancient mummy's head. Wuxia. The sound of an object being cut through came out. Soren slowly retracted his curved sword, and there was only a mummy's body with its head cut off at his feet. Soren, slaughter form, vs ancient mummy. KO. After dealing with the ancient mummy in front of him, he turned to other people who were still in a daze. The dwarven juggernaut looked at him and could not help but swallow. His forehead was full of cold sweat. The Ronin's hand holding the hilt was trembling slightly, and the muscles of his body had been stretched to the limit. The desert warrior's expression was even worse, and there was obvious fear on his face. As for the oriental dancer who was saved by Soren at the beginning, she opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but when the words came to her mouth, it was as if someone was strangling her throat and she could not speak. Soren's eyes were too cold and terrifying. The pressure seemed to penetrate into their souls, making it difficult for them to even speak. Thirst for killing. The soul of the ancient mummy satisfied part of the thirst for killing, but even if it was a legendary monster, it could not satisfy Soren's thirst for killing. More killing. Soren was now like a person who had been hungry for a long time and barely ate half full. More thirst made him gradually lose control. Stay here and wait for me. A cold and emotionless voice sounded. Soren's figure flew out in an instant, and then smashed a closed passage with his fist. He directly relied on his terrifying brute force to open a path. Then his figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving only 4 teammates standing in the same place with frightened expressions. The surrounding scenery was quickly retreating. Dark vision allowed Soren to easily shuttle through here. Some undead appeared in front of him, but none of them could withstand Soren's sword for a second. Even the skeleton undead with a monster level of 15 could only resist 1.5 of Soren's sword. He killed all the monsters he saw without any expression, because he knew that if he did not satisfy his desire after transforming into a slaughterer, he might fall into a state of madness and kill all his teammates and the human laborers outside. The merciless harvest continued. Soren estimated that his challenge rating in the slaughterer form could reach more than 18. In the entire ruins, the only one who could fight with him was the Baler that was sealed in the deepest part of the ruins. Thirst. The thirst for killing came from the soul. These trashy monsters wandering in the ruins could not satisfy Soren's thirst for killing. He needed stronger enemies and stronger souls to satisfy his thirst for killing. The scorching hot air was spreading. The temperature of the ground had risen unknowingly. If it was a normal person standing on the ground, they would probably feel their feet burning, but Soren did not feel the slightest bit. The light of the flames appeared. In the depths of the ruins, there seemed to be a reflection of the flames, and a huge and twisted figure. The Baler. As a high-level demon from the abyss, it also felt the aura of slaughter, death, and destruction. This aura was very familiar to it because it felt like it was the same kind of aura. The Baler brought slaughter and destruction in the flames, and death was its favorite feast. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.